The barn door hung crooked on its hinges, swaying in the desert wind like a broken jaw. Caleb Rourke stood in the doorway, his hands still shaking, staring at the woman he'd married 3 weeks ago, now crumpled in the straw, blood pooling beneath her split lip, a note pinned to her torn sleeve with a rusted nail. "She belongs to us. Stay alone, cowboy, or die trying to save her." In that moment, everything Caleb thought he knew shattered. This wasn't just an attack, this was a declaration of war, and before this night ends, you'll understand why some men choose to fight even when the whole frontier tells them to surrender. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button, and stay with me until the final shot is fired. The first time Caleb Rourke saw another human being in 6 days, it was the mail coach kicking up dust 3 miles out from Red Hollow Ranch, and his chest tightened with something he'd forgotten how to name. Hope, maybe. Or just the terrible weight of expectation. He stood on the porch of his ranch house, a weathered structure of gray timber and fading paint that matched the color of his own weathered soul, and watched the coach grow larger against the ochre horizon. The September sun hammered down without mercy, the way it always did in this god-forsaken corner of the New Mexico territory, where the land stretched out so flat and endless a man could lose himself just by standing still. Caleb was 42 years old, though his face carried 50. His hands were calloused from years of mending fence posts, breaking horses, and burying things he didn't want to remember. His eyes, once a bright hazel, had faded to something closer to dust. He wore his loneliness like a second skin, so familiar he barely noticed it anymore, until the letters started coming. It had been Marcus Hale's idea, actually. The ranger had stopped by Red Hollow 6 months back, chasing rumors of rustlers who turned out to be nothing more than coyotes with an appetite for young calves. Over coffee and cigarettes, Marcus had studied Caleb with the kind of knowing look that made a man uncomfortable. "You're drying up out here, Rourke," Marcus had said, lighting a hand-rolled cigarette with a match struck against his boot heel. "Man wasn't meant to live alone this long. Turns him into something that ain't quite human anymore." "I'm managing just fine," Caleb had replied, but the words tasted like ash. Managing ain't living. Marcus had pulled a crumpled newspaper from his saddlebag, smoothing it out on the table between them. "You ever think about one of these mail-order arrangements? I know it sounds desperate, but hell, Caleb, what you're doing now, that's desperate too, just slower." Caleb had stared at the advertisements, feeling something twist in his gut. Women seeking husbands, husbands seeking wives, words like companionship and new beginnings, and correspondence welcomed. It all seemed so transactional, so clinical. But late that night, after Marcus had ridden off and the silence of the ranch had pressed in like a physical weight, Caleb had picked up that newspaper again. 3 weeks later, he'd mailed his first letter. Her name was Eliza Vale, or so she'd written. Her letters arrived like clockwork, once every 2 weeks, written in a careful hand that suggested education and care. She told him she was 28, originally from a small town in Kansas, orphaned young and raised by an aunt who'd recently passed. She wrote about books she'd read, about her hope for a simpler life, about her belief that 2 lonely people might find something beautiful together if they were brave enough to try. Caleb's letters back had been stiff at first, all facts and no feeling. He'd described the ranch, the work, the land, but gradually something had thawed in him. He'd started writing about the sunrise over the mesas, the way the stars looked when the air was clear, the satisfaction of fixing something broken with his own 2 hands. He'd written things he hadn't said aloud in years, and now she was here. The coach pulled to a stop in a cloud of dust and creaking wood. The driver, a grizzled old man named Parsons, who ran the route between Socorro and the scattered settlements beyond, climbed down with a grunt. "Got a delivery for you, Rourke," Parsons called out, moving to the coach door. "A mighty pretty one, if you don't mind me saying." Caleb stepped off of the porch, his boots crunching in the dry earth. His heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape. When Parsons opened the door, a small gloved hand appeared first, followed by a woman in a gray traveling dress that had seen better days. Eliza Vale was not what Caleb had expected, though he couldn't have said exactly what he'd been expecting. She was slight, with dark hair pinned up beneath a modest hat and eyes that seemed too large for her face, brown and wary and bright with intelligence. Her skin was pale, suggesting she hadn't spent much time under an unforgiving sun, and when she stepped down from the coach, she moved with a careful grace that spoke of either breeding or caution, or both. "Mr. Rourke?" Her voice was softer than he'd imagined, with a slight tremor that might have been nerves or exhaustion. "Ma'am." Caleb removed his hat, suddenly acutely aware of how rough he must look, unshaven, sun-scorched, smelling of horse and leather and dust. "Welcome to Red Hollow." "Thank you." She looked around at the ranch, and Caleb tried to see it through her eyes. The house that needed paint, the barn that listed slightly to the left, the corrals where 3 horses stood swishing their tails, the endless empty land stretching out in all directions. It's very open, isn't it?" "Yes, ma'am, it is." Parsons hauled down a battered trunk and a carpet bag, setting them in the dust with more force than necessary. "That'll be it then. I got a schedule to keep." He climbed back up to the driver's seat, then paused. "You take care now, miss. This is rough country." "I will, thank you." The coach pulled away, and suddenly they were alone. 2 strangers standing in the desert, bound by letters and longing and a contract neither of them fully understood. "You must be tired," Caleb said, picking up her trunk. It was lighter than he expected. "And hungry. I got some stew on the stove. It ain't fancy, but it's hot." "That sounds wonderful." She picked up the carpet bag and followed him toward the house. "Your letters describe this place, but seeing it, it's different, bigger, lonelier. Does that scare you?" She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, there was steel beneath the softness. "I've been scared before, Mr. Rourke. I'm still here." Something in those words made Caleb glance back at her, but her expression was carefully neutral. He pushed open the door to the house and gestured her inside. The interior was spare but clean. Caleb had spent the previous week scrubbing floors, washing windows, and generally trying to make the place presentable for a woman's eyes. There was a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, 2 bedrooms, and not much else. Everything was functional, nothing decorative. "I know it ain't much," Caleb said, setting her trunk down, "but it's solid, keeps the wind out in winter, stays cool enough in summer." "It's fine." Eliza, he still thought of her as Eliza, though he'd learn differently soon enough, set down her bag and removed her hat, revealing hair that was starting to come loose from its pins. There was a bruise on her temple, faint but visible, and when she caught him looking, she touched it self-consciously. "The coach ride was rough. I bumped my head." Caleb nodded, but something nagged at him. That bruise was yellow-green at the edges. Older than any coach ride. "I'll get you that stew," he said. They ate in awkward silence, 2 people who'd shared intimate thoughts on paper now finding themselves strangers in flesh. Caleb watched her eat, small, careful bites, like someone who'd learned to make food last. She barely touched the cornbread. "The Reverend in Socorro can marry us tomorrow," Caleb said finally. "If that suits you. Or we can wait a few days, let you settle in first." Eliza's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "Tomorrow is fine. The sooner it's official, the better." "You running from something?" The question came out before Caleb could stop it, and he immediately regretted the bluntness. But Eliza didn't flinch. She set down her spoon and looked him directly in the eyes. "Aren't we all running from something, Mr. Rourke? Isn't that why you're out here, 40 miles from the nearest town, living alone on a ranch that's too big for one man?" Her voice wasn't unkind, just honest. "I'm not running from the law, if that's what you're asking. I've done nothing criminal, but yes, I'm leaving things behind, bad things, and I'm praying that this place, with you, can be a new start." Caleb studied her for a long moment. The lamplight cast shadows across her face, highlighting the delicate bones, the wary eyes, the set of her jaw that suggested determination. Whatever she was running from, she wasn't running scared. She was running smart. "All right," he said finally. "Tomorrow, then." That night, Caleb gave her the main bedroom and made up a bedroll for himself in the front room. He lay awake listening to the wind, thinking about the woman sleeping 20 feet away, wondering what in hell he'd gotten himself into. He'd wanted companionship, wanted to stop the slow erosion of his humanity that solitude brought, But he hadn't expected this feeling, this strange mix of protectiveness and suspicion, attraction and uncertainty. He'd expected simple. This was anything but. Mess. They rode into Socorro the next morning on Caleb's wagon, the early light turning the desert pink and gold. Eliza wore her best dress, a dark blue cotton that was clean, but showed signs of repeated mending. She sat beside him on the bench, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight despite the wagon's jolting over the rough road. "Tell me about the ranch," she said as they rode. "Your letters mentioned you built it yourself." "Most of it." Caleb kept his eyes on the road. "Bought the land 12 years ago when it was nothing but scrub and rock. Built the house first, then the barn. Started with 6 head of cattle. Now I got near 50. It ain't a fortune, but it's mine." "No debts?" "None. I work for myself, answer to nobody." "That must be a good feeling." "It is. Or it was." He glanced at her. "Gets lonely, though. A man can only talk to horses for so long before he starts to doubt his own mind." A small smile touched her lips. "And you think a wife will be better conversation than horses?" "I'm hoping." Socorro was a dusty town of maybe 200 souls, clustered around a main street that featured a general store, a saloon, a church, and various other establishments that served the scattered ranchers and miners who called this corner of the territory home. Caleb tied up the wagon outside the church, a simple wooden structure with a cross above the door, and helped Eliza down. Reverend Hayes was a thin man with kind eyes and hands that trembled slightly from some old injury or illness. He greeted them warmly, asked no uncomfortable questions, and performed the ceremony with a gentle efficiency that Caleb appreciated. There were 2 witnesses pulled in from the street, a shopkeeper and his wife who clearly relished the small drama of a frontier wedding. "Do you, Caleb James Rourke, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Eliza Rose Vale, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" There was the briefest hesitation, a flicker of something in her eyes, fear, regret, before she answered. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of New Mexico, I pronounce you husband and wife." No kiss, no celebration, just a signature in a ledger and a handshake from the Reverend. They walked out into the bright sunlight as husband and wife, 2 people bound by law and hope and desperation. "We should get some supplies while we're here," Caleb said. "Unless you want to head straight back." "Supplies would be good." They spent an hour in the general store, Eliza selecting fabric for curtains, Caleb restocking flour, coffee, ammunition. The proprietor, a gossipy woman named Mrs. Chen, watched them with undisguised interest. "You're the mail-order bride, aren't you?" Mrs. Chen said to Eliza with a frankness that made Caleb wince. "Heard you were coming. Brave of you, coming all this way to marry a stranger." "Or foolish," Eliza replied softly, but she smiled as she said it. "Well, Caleb Rourke's a good man. Keeps to himself, works hard, pays his debts. You could do worse." Mrs. Chen leaned in conspiratorially. "Though I'll warn you, this country's harder on women than men. The loneliness, the work, the sun. It breaks some. You got to be tough." "I'm tougher than I look." Something in the way she said it made Mrs. Chen nod approvingly. "I believe you are, honey. I believe you are." They were loading the wagon when a man approached from across the street. He was well dressed by frontier standards, clean shirt, pressed trousers, a hat that hadn't seen too much dust. His face was pleasant, almost handsome, with a neat mustache and eyes that smiled even when his mouth didn't. "Caleb Rourke," the man said warmly, extending his hand. "Been a while." Caleb shook it warily. "Victor, didn't know you were back in town." "Just passing through. Business, you know how it is." Victor's gaze shifted to Eliza and his smile widened. "And who's this lovely lady?" "My wife. Eliza, this is Victor Grange. He runs—" "What is it you run these days, Victor?" "Import-export, bit of freighting, help people find what they need." Victor tipped his hat to Eliza. "A pleasure, Mrs. Rourke. Caleb's a lucky man." "Thank you." Eliza's voice was barely above a whisper, and Caleb noticed she'd gone pale. "Well, I won't keep you," Victor said, stepping back. "Just wanted to say hello. Caleb, if you ever need anything, extra hands at the ranch, supplies, whatever, You let me know. Always happy to help an old friend. Appreciate it. Victor walked away and Caleb turned to help Eliza onto the wagon. Her hands were shaking. You all right? Fine, just tired. Can we go home now? Sure. They rode back to Red Hollow in silence, but Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The way Eliza had reacted to Victor, the pallor, the trembling, it wasn't normal. And Victor's sudden friendliness was suspect too. They'd known each other years ago, had even worked together briefly on a cattle drive, but they'd never been close, never been friends. As the ranch came into view, Caleb made a decision. He'd give Eliza time to settle in, to trust him. But he'd also start asking questions, because whatever she was running from, it had just found her. Kikit. The first 2 weeks of marriage were an education in awkwardness. Caleb and Eliza circled each other like cautious animals, learning the rhythms of shared space. She cooked. Simple meals that were nevertheless better than anything Caleb had managed alone. He worked the ranch, rising before dawn to check the cattle, mend fences, break a young mare that had been fighting the saddle. They spoke in practical sentences about practical things. The well needs cleaning. I'll do it tomorrow. The chickens aren't laying much, might need better feed. I'll pick some up next time I'm in town. But at night, lying in their separate beds, Caleb had insisted she keep the main bedroom, had made no move to suggest otherwise. He could hear her moving restlessly, sometimes crying so softly he might have imagined it. Gradually, though, something began to shift. It started with small things. Eliza began to relax, to smile more readily. She started asking him questions about the ranch, about his past, about his dreams for the future. She hung the curtains she'd bought, adding a softness to the harsh lines of the house. She planted herbs in a small garden near the kitchen door, their green shoots a defiant splash of life in the dust. And Caleb found himself talking more, laughing more, feeling more human than he had in years. One evening, after a particularly good meal, Eliza surprised him by pulling out a book, a worn volume of poetry. Would you like me to read to you? She asked. I know it's not very practical, but I used to love doing this in the evenings. It made the world feel bigger. Caleb, who hadn't heard poetry since his mother died 30 years ago, nodded. I'd like that. She read to him about love and loss, about nature and beauty, about the ache of longing. Her voice transformed the words, made them sing. And when she finished, Caleb realized he'd been holding his breath. That was beautiful, he said quietly. I'm glad you think so. She closed the book, running her fingers over the cover. This was my mother's, one of the few things I have left of her. Tell me about her. And for the first time, Eliza, though he still didn't know that wasn't her real name, opened up. She talked about a childhood marked by loss, but also love, about an aunt who'd been kind but distant, about a world that had always felt slightly out of reach. She didn't mention the bruise on her temple, or the way she sometimes flinched at sudden movements, or the nightmares that woke her gasping. But Caleb noticed. He always noticed. It was on the 17th night of their marriage that everything changed. Caleb had ridden out that afternoon to check on the northern pasture, where he'd spotted signs of coyotes harassing the herd. He'd returned after dark, later than he'd intended, tired and hungry. The house was lit with lamplight, smoke curling from the chimney, and for a moment his heart lifted. This is what home feels like, he thought. This is what I've been missing. But as he approached the barn to unsaddle his horse, he heard something that made his blood freeze. A whimper, soft, pained, desperate. He dropped the reins and ran. The barn door was open, swaying in the wind. Inside, the lamplight from the house cast long shadows, but he could see her, Eliza, crumpled in the straw near the feed bins, her dress torn, blood on her face. Eliza! He was on his knees beside her, his hands hovering, afraid to touch her, afraid he'd cause more pain. What happened? Who did this? Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. He found me, she whispered. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I thought I had more time. Who found you? But she'd lost consciousness, her head lolling to the side. That's when Caleb saw it. The note pinned to her sleeve with a nail, the crude printing written in what looked like charcoal. She belongs to us. Stay alone, cowboy, or die trying to save her. We'll be back. Rage surged through Caleb, hot and pure and clarifying. He lifted Eliza as gently as he could, feeling how light she was, how fragile, and carried her to the house. He laid her on the bed, lit every lamp he owned, and began assessing the damage. Her face was bruised, her lips split. There were marks around her wrists, rope burns, fresh. Someone had tied her, beaten her, left her as a message. He cleaned her wounds with water warmed on the stove, his hands shaking with a fury he hadn't felt in years. When she began to stir, he held a cup of water to her lips. "Drink." She did, coughing, her eyes clearing. When she saw him, tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I should have told you. I wanted to, but I was afraid you'd send me away. Tell me what?" "My name isn't Eliza Vale," her voice cracked. "It's Lydia. Lydia Ashford. And the people who did this, they've been hunting me for months." Caleb sat back, processing this, the note still clutched in his hand. "Why?" "Because I escaped. Because I have something they want. Because I know things that could destroy them." She struggled to sit up, wincing. "I need to tell you everything. You deserve to know what you've gotten yourself into. But first, you need to understand, these aren't ordinary criminals. They're organized, they're ruthless, and they have connections everywhere. If you help me, you'll be putting yourself in danger, real danger." Caleb looked at her. This woman who'd come to him with hope in her letters, who'd married him under a false name, who'd brought violence to his doorstep. He should have been angry. Part of him was. But a larger part, the part that had spent 12 years building something from nothing, the part that didn't bend easily, felt something else entirely. Determination. "I ain't afraid of danger," he said quietly. "And I sure as hell ain't gonna let anyone come onto my land and hurt my wife, whatever your name is, without answering for it." Lydia stared at him, disbelief and hope warring in her eyes. "You don't understand what you're saying." "I understand perfectly." Caleb stood, moving to the window, scanning the darkness outside. "Now tell me everything. Start from the beginning, and don't leave anything out." So she did. The story Lydia told was worse than anything Caleb had imagined. It had started 18 months ago, in a city back east, St. Louis. Lydia had been working as a seamstress, barely making ends meet after her aunt's death. She'd seen an advertisement for a matrimonial agency that promised to help women find respectable husbands out west. It seemed like an answer to prayer. "But it was a trap," Lydia said, her voice hollow. "The agency was run by a man named Victor Grange." Caleb's stomach dropped. "The man we saw in Socorro." "Yes." Lydia wrapped her arms around herself. "He seemed so kind at first, so helpful. He said he had connections with ranchers and businessmen all over the frontier, men looking for wives. He took a small fee, affordable, reasonable, and he showed me letters from satisfied women who'd found happiness through his service. But it was all a lie. Not all of it. Some women did find husbands, but Victor wasn't running a matrimonial agency. He was running a trafficking ring." She took a shaky breath. "He'd match women with men, arrange the marriages, take his fee. But then, a few weeks or months later, he or his associates would show up. They'd claim the marriage was fraudulent, that the woman had misrepresented herself, that debts were owed. They'd threaten to expose secrets, real or invented, unless money was paid. A lot of money. Blackmail. And worse, if the husband couldn't or wouldn't pay, they'd take the woman back, forcibly, and then she'd disappear into something worse. Sold to brothels in mining towns, or moved to another territory to be married off again under a different name. It was a cycle. Trap, exploit, discard, repeat. Caleb felt sick. "How did you figure it out?" "I got lucky. Or unlucky, depending on how you look at it." Lydia stood, moving to the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. "Victor arranged my marriage to a rancher in Kansas. The man seemed decent enough, and I thought I'd escaped poverty, loneliness. But 2 months after we were married, Victor showed up with 2 other men. They had documents, fake documents, claiming I'd lied about my background, that I was wanted for theft back in St. Louis. They demanded $5,000 or they'd turn me over to the law." "What did your husband do?" "He paid. He loved me, or at least he thought he did, and he paid. But it ruined him financially. And I realized that Victor would just keep coming back. Once you paid, you were marked as a target forever. She turned to face Caleb. So I started asking questions. I started watching. And I discovered that Victor kept records, a ledger documenting every woman, every marriage, every payment, every threat, names, dates, amounts, evidence of dozens of crimes across multiple territories. And you stole it. I copied it, every page. I spent 3 weeks sneaking into his office when he visited the ranch, transcribing everything into a notebook I kept hidden. And when I had it all, I ran. Her voice hardened. I used the name Eliza Vale, a woman who died in childbirth in Socorro, whose death I'd read about in an old newspaper. I forged documents, changed my appearance, traveled in circles to throw off anyone following, and I found your advertisement, a man on an isolated ranch far from anywhere, wanting a wife. It seemed safe. But they found you anyway. I don't know how. Maybe they tracked the letters, maybe they had someone watching the matrimonial advertisements, maybe it was just bad luck. But Victor's in Socorro, and now his men know where I am. She met his eyes. The note said they'll be back. They will. And when they come, they won't just want the ledger. They'll want to make an example of me. Of us. Caleb absorbed all of this, the weight of it pressing down like a physical thing. He'd wanted to escape loneliness, to find companionship. Instead, he'd married into a war. This ledger, he said finally. Where is it? Lydia hesitated, then reached into her dress, pulling out a small leather-bound notebook from an inside pocket. I keep it with me always. It's the only leverage I have. Caleb took it, flipping through pages covered in Lydia's careful handwriting. Names he recognized, wealthy merchants, town officials, even a territorial judge. Amounts of money, descriptions of threats and violence. It was damning. If this got into the right hands, it would destroy Victor's operation and put a lot of powerful men in prison. You should have gone to the law with this, Caleb said. I couldn't. Look at the names, Caleb. Half the lawmen in 3 territories are on Victor's payroll. If I'd walked into a sheriff's office with this, I'd have been dead within a day. Or worse, disappeared. She took the notebook back, clutching it to her chest. My only chance was to hide, to become someone else, to hope they'd stop looking. They won't stop. Men like that never do. I know. Tears spilled down her cheeks again. I'm sorry I brought this to your door. I'm sorry I lied. If you want to send me away, I'll understand. I'll take the ledger and disappear. Maybe draw them away from you. Caleb looked at her. This small, fierce woman who'd survived things he could barely imagine, who'd risked everything to expose evil, who'd chosen his ranch as a sanctuary. He thought about the note, the threat, the violence that had already visited his land, and he thought about the man he used to be, before loneliness had hollowed him out. The man who'd built this ranch from nothing, the man who didn't run. No, he said, you're not going anywhere. This is your home now, and anyone who wants to take you from it will have to go through me first. Caleb, I know exactly what I'm doing. He moved to the gun cabinet in the corner, unlocking it, pulling out his Winchester rifle. Tomorrow morning, I'm riding to find Marcus Hale. He's the only lawman I trust, and if anyone can help us, it's him. In the meantime, we're going to prepare, board up the windows, stock ammunition, get ready. They'll come with more than 2 or 3 men. Victor has a whole network. Then we'll need help. Caleb checked the rifle's action, satisfied with the smooth click of the mechanism. I know a few men in these parts. Good men. Men who don't take kindly to the kind of business Victor's running. If I ask, some of them will stand with us. Lydia stared at him like he'd sprouted wings. Why are you doing this? You barely know me. Everything about our marriage is a lie. Not everything. Caleb set the rifle down, moved to stand in front of her. Your name might be different, but your letters were real. The woman who wrote about hope and new beginnings, who reads poetry in the evenings, who plants herbs because she wants to make this place beautiful. That woman's real, and she's my wife. Papers say so. That means something to me. Even if it gets you killed? Especially then. He smiled, a rare expression that transformed his weathered face. I've been half dead for years, Lydia, living here alone, going through the motions. You changed that. For the first time in a long time, I feel alive. I'm not giving that up without a fight. She broke then, collapsing against him, sobbing. Caleb held her awkwardly at first, then with more confidence, his arms wrapping around her small frame. She smelled of lavender and fear and courage, and he made a silent promise to whatever god might be listening that he wouldn't let anyone hurt her again. Not while he drew breath. Whoops. Dawn came cold and bright, the sky painted in shades of orange and gold. Caleb was already up, had been up most of the night. In fact, preparing. He'd pulled every weapon he owned from storage. 3 rifles, 2 pistols, a shotgun that had belonged to his father. He'd counted ammunition, sharpened his knife, and begun boarding up the windows on the first floor. Lydia emerged from the bedroom looking exhausted but determined. The bruises on her face had darkened overnight, making her look fragile and fierce at the same time. "I'll make coffee," she said. "Make it strong. It's going to be a long day." While the coffee brewed, Caleb explained his plan. He'd ride to the ranger outpost 20 miles west where Marcus Hale was stationed. Marcus was honest, competent, and owed Caleb a favor from years back. If anyone could help navigate the corruption and bring legitimate law enforcement to bear, it was Marcus. "But that leaves you alone here," Lydia protested. "What if they come while you're gone?" "They won't. Not yet." Caleb poured himself a cup of coffee, the bitter liquid scalding his throat. "Last night was a warning. They wanted to scare us, let us know they're watching. The actual attack will come later, when we've had time to think about it, to get scared. They'll want us desperate." "And you're going to give them desperate, just not the kind they're expecting." "Exactly." Before Caleb left, he showed Lydia how to load and fire the shotgun. She'd claimed to have some experience with firearms. Her father had taught her before he died, and she handled the weapon with more confidence than he'd expected. "You see anyone approaching who ain't me or Marcus, you shoot first and ask questions later," Caleb said. "Don't hesitate. Don't try to talk, just shoot." "I understand." "And if things go wrong, if they come in force before I get back, I know." Lydia's jaw set. "I hide the ledger, set fire to the house if I have to, and run for the canyons. You told me 3 times already. I'm telling you a 4th. Your life is more important than this ranch. And your life is more important than my pride." She touched his face, a gentle gesture that surprised him. "Be careful, Caleb, please." "I will." He rode out as the sun cleared the horizon, pushing his horse hard across the open land. The ride to the ranger outpost took him through some of the most desolate country in the territory. Rocky flats, dried creek beds, mesas that rose like ancient monuments from the earth. It was beautiful in its harshness, and Caleb had always loved it. But today, all he could think about was the woman he'd left behind, alone and vulnerable, in a house that suddenly felt more like a target than a sanctuary. He found Marcus at the outpost just after noon, the ranger standing outside the small adobe structure that served as his base, cleaning his rifle in the shade. "Caleb?" Marcus looked up, his weathered face breaking into a smile that faded when he saw Caleb's expression. "What's wrong?" "I need your help, and I need you to trust me when I tell you that what I'm about to say sounds insane, but it's true." Marcus set down his rifle slowly. "All right, I'm listening." Caleb told him everything: the marriage, Lydia's real identity, the trafficking ring, the ledger, the attack. He spoke quickly, economically, knowing that every minute he spent here was a minute Lydia was alone. When he finished, Marcus was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You're telling me that Victor Grange, the same Victor Grange who runs freight contracts half the territory, is running a criminal operation that spans multiple states?" Marcus said finally. "Yes." "And you have evidence?" "My wife copied his entire operations records, names, dates, payments, everything." Marcus whistled low. That's big, Caleb. Bigger than anything I can handle alone. This needs to go to the territorial marshal, maybe even federal authorities." "I know, but that takes time, and I don't have time. Victor's men are already at my ranch. They attacked Lydia, left a threat. They'll be back, and when they come, they won't be looking to negotiate." "How long do you think we have?" "Days? Maybe less." Marcus rubbed his jaw, thinking. "All right, here's what we do. I'll ride with you back to your ranch. We'll fortify the position, get ready for whatever comes. Meanwhile, I'll send word to the marshal in Santa Fe, tell him we need backup. If we can hold out for 3, maybe 4 days, reinforcements will arrive." "And if they don't?" Then we do what men like us have always done. Marcus picked up his rifle again, checking the action. We stand our ground and make them pay for every inch. Caleb felt something ease in his chest. Not relief exactly, but the comfort of not facing this alone. I need to ask you something else. I need men. Good men who can shoot and won't run when things get bad. I know a couple. Dutch Mercer runs cattle about 15 miles south of you. He's old, but he's steady. And there's a woman, actually, Anna Birch. Runs a way station on the North Road. Lost her husband to outlaws 5 years back, and she's been spoiling for a fight ever since. Marcus grinned. She's meaner than most men I know. They'll come? If I ask them? Yeah, they'll come. They rode back to Red Hollow together, Marcus sending a young courier ahead to the outpost with instructions to alert the territorial marshal. The sun was setting by the time they reached the ranch, and Caleb's heart didn't stop pounding until he saw Lydia standing on the porch, the shotgun in her hands, relief flooding her face when she recognized him. You came back, she said, and there was something in her voice, surprise, gratitude, wonder, that made Caleb realize how little she'd trusted his promise. Told you I would. He dismounted, gesturing to Marcus. This is Ranger Marcus Hale. He's going to help. Lydia looked at Marcus warily, and Caleb understood. She'd spent months running from men in positions of authority, many of them corrupt. Trusting a ranger would be hard, but Marcus seemed to understand too. He removed his hat, offered a respectful nod. Ma'am, Caleb told me what you've been through, what you're carrying in that ledger. If it's what he says it is, it's going to change things, put away a lot of bad men. If we survive long enough to use it, Lydia replied quietly. We will. Marcus's voice carried the weight of conviction. I give you my word. Over the next 2 days, Red Hollow Ranch transformed into something resembling a fortress. Dutch Mercer arrived first, a grizzled man in his 60s with a limp from an old war wound and eyes that still burned with fire. He brought his 2 sons, both strong young men who could handle rifles and didn't ask unnecessary questions. Anna Birch came next, riding a black mare and carrying enough weapons to outfit a small army. She was in her 40s, tall and raw-boned, with gray streaking her dark hair and a scar across her left cheek that she wore like a badge of honor. Heard you got woman trouble, Anna said to Caleb by way of greeting. Figured you could use someone who knows how to shoot straight. Appreciate it. Don't appreciate me yet. Wait till you see my bill. Despite the tension, Lydia laughed, a real laugh that made everyone smile. They worked together, these unlikely allies preparing for war. They reinforced the barn, stacked hay bales to create firing positions, dug shallow trenches around the perimeter. Marcus set up a signal system, a mirror for daytime, a fire for night, that could be seen from the main road, hoping that if reinforcements came, they'd know to approach with caution. Lydia helped with everything, refusing to be protected or coddled. She loaded ammunition, cooked meals for the group, and impressed everyone with her calm efficiency under pressure. Your wife's got spine, Anna told Caleb one evening as they watched Lydia organizing supplies. Most women would have run screaming by now. She's not most women. No, she's not. Anna paused. You love her? Caleb considered the question. Don't know yet, but I'm starting to. Good. Worth fighting for then. On the 3rd night, Marcus pulled Caleb aside. I need to see the ledger. If this goes south, if we don't make it, someone needs to know what's in there. Lydia overheard and brought out the notebook, handing it to Marcus with reluctance. The ranger spent an hour reading by lamplight, his expression growing darker with each page. Sweet mercy, he breathed finally. This is worse than I thought. These names. Caleb, if this information gets out, it's going to shake the whole territory. Judges, sheriffs, businessmen, half the power structure is implicated. Which is why they'll come hard, Caleb said. They can't afford to let this survive. We need a backup plan. If the ranch gets overrun, if we can't hold... I already made one. Lydia's voice was quiet but firm. I copied the most important pages, sent them to 3 different newspapers in different territories with instructions to publish if I don't check in by a specific date. Everyone stared at her. When did you do that? Caleb asked. Before I left Socorro. It was a gamble. I didn't know if the letters would reach their destinations or if the editors would take them seriously, but I figured it was better than keeping all the evidence in one place. Marcus started laughing, a rough, appreciative sound. Lady, you're smarter than half the rangers I've worked with. If those papers publish, Victor and his whole organization are finished, whether we survive or not. That was the idea. It also means they're going to be desperate, Dutch pointed out. A cornered animal's the most dangerous kind. Let them be desperate, Anna said, checking her rifle. We'll be ready. But as Caleb looked out at the dark desert, at the stars emerging like ice chips in the black sky, he wondered if any of them truly understood what was coming. They had 7 people, limited ammunition, and a ranch that for all their preparations was still just wood and adobe against whatever force Victor could muster. And somewhere out there in the darkness, Victor Grange and his men were coming. The only question was when. The answer came at dawn on the 4th day, announced by the thunder of hooves and the distant glint of sunlight on steel. Marcus, who'd been keeping watch from the barn roof, gave a sharp whistle. Riders, coming from the south. 20, maybe 25. Caleb grabbed his rifle, his heart hammering. Positions, everyone to positions. Lydia appeared at his side, her face pale but resolute. This is it, isn't it? Yeah. He touched her face gently, memorizing the feel of her skin. Whatever happens, you stay in the house. Don't come out unless I call for you. Caleb, please, Lydia, I need to know you're safe. I can't fight if I'm worrying about you. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and kissed him. A brief, fierce kiss that tasted of fear and hope and something that might have been love. Then she disappeared into the house, and Caleb took his position behind a water trough, sighting down his rifle at the approaching riders. They came on fast, spreading out as they neared the ranch, and in the lead, mounted on a beautiful bay horse, was Victor Grange. He'd traded his town clothes for something more practical, dark trousers, a long coat, a hat pulled low. He held a white flag. Hold fire, Marcus called out. Let's hear what he has to say. The riders stopped about 50 yards out, and Victor rode forward alone, stopping just outside rifle range. He looked relaxed, almost amused, as he surveyed the fortified ranch. Caleb Rourke, Victor called out. This is a hell of a welcome for an old friend. We ain't friends, Victor, and you ain't welcome here. I think there's been a misunderstanding. See, you have something that belongs to me. A woman. Goes by a lot of names, but you might know her as Eliza Vale. Or maybe she told you the truth, Lydia Ashford. She's my wife, legally married. She doesn't belong to anyone. Victor's smile never wavered. Marriage obtained under false pretenses. Fraudulent identity. That makes the contract void, I'm afraid. Now, I don't want any trouble. Just send her out, along with whatever paperwork she might have stolen from me, and we'll be on our way. No harm, no foul. And if I don't? Then this gets unpleasant. And Caleb, you're outnumbered 5-1. You've got some local help. I can see them hiding behind your hay bales, but they're not going to die for a woman they don't know. Be reasonable. Hand her over. Caleb stood up slowly, making himself visible. Here's my counteroffer, Victor. You turn around and ride out. Leave the territory. Because in about 2 days, federal marshals are going to arrive with warrants for your arrest. Lydia's already sent copies of your ledger to 3 different newspapers. Your operation's over. For the first time, Victor's smile flickered. You're bluffing. Maybe. You willing to bet your life on it? A long silence stretched out, broken only by the sound of horses shifting, leather creaking. Then Victor's smile returned, colder now. You know, Caleb, I always thought you were smarter than this. Guess I was wrong. He turned his horse. Last chance. Send her out. Go to hell. Victor nodded, as if he'd expected this. All right then. Boys, light 'em up. And the world exploded into gunfire. The first bullets chewed into the water trough with a sound like hammers on steel, sending splinters of wood flying. Caleb ducked low, feeling the spray of torn wood against his face, and returned fire. His first shot caught one of Victor's men in the shoulder, spinning him sideways off his horse with a scream that cut through the chaos. Aim for the horses! Marcus shouted from the barn roof, his rifle cracking rhythmically. Put them on foot! Dutch and his sons opened up from the eastern corner, their coordinated fire dropping 2 more riders. Anna Birch, positioned near the well, was shooting with mechanical precision, each shot deliberate and deadly. The morning air filled with gunpowder smoke, the acrid smell mixing with dust kicked up by panicked horses. Victor's men scattered, some dismounting to take cover behind rocks and scrub brush, others wheeling their horses to circle around toward the barn. They were professionals, Caleb realized, with a sinking feeling. Not random thugs, but experienced gunmen who knew how to fight. "They're trying to flank," Dutch called out, firing at a pair of riders breaking left. "Someone cover the north side." Caleb sprinted across the open yard, bullets kicking up dirt at his heels, and threw himself behind a stack of firewood just as 3 riders came around the corner of the barn. He fired without aiming, working the lever action as fast as his hands could move, and saw one man tumble backward. The other 2 veered off, circling back toward their main group. From inside the house, Caleb heard the boom of the shotgun. Once. Twice. His heart seized. Lydia was shooting. That meant someone had gotten close. "I'm going to the house," he shouted to Marcus. "Go! We'll hold here!" Caleb ran in a crouch, zigzagging as bullets whined past him. He hit the porch at a dead run and burst through the door to find Lydia standing at the window, the shotgun smoking in her hands. Outside, 2 men lay motionless in the dust. "They tried to come through the back," she said, her voice shaking but steady. "I waited until they were at the door." "Good girl." Caleb moved to the opposite window, using his rifle barrel to knock out the remaining glass. "Stay low. They'll try again." They did. For the next hour, Victor's men pressed the attack from all sides, trying to find a weakness in the ranch's defenses. They set fire to the storage shed, the flames leaping high and threatening to spread to the barn. Anna abandoned her position to fight the blaze, shooting at attackers with one hand while throwing buckets of water with the other. One of Dutch's sons, the younger one, barely 20, took a bullet in the leg and went down screaming. His father and brother dragged him to cover, Dutch cursing steadily as he wrapped the wound with torn cloth. "How bad?" Marcus called down from the barn roof. "Bad enough. He needs a doctor." "He'll have to wait. Keep him still and keep pressure on it." The attack shifted as the sun climbed higher. Victor's men pulled back, regrouping beyond rifle range, and for a few minutes there was blessed silence, broken only by the moans of wounded men on both sides. Caleb took the opportunity to reload, his hands moving automatically while his mind raced. They'd held so far, but already they were down 1 fighter and running through ammunition faster than he'd hoped. The morning's fighting had probably killed or wounded 5 or 6 of Victor's men, but that still left 15 or more, odds that would grind them down eventually. "Water," Lydia said, appearing at his elbow with a canteen. She had powder burns on her face and her hands were shaking, but her eyes were clear. "Drink." He did, the warm water cutting through the dust in his throat. "You okay?" "I've been better. I've been worse." She looked out at the desert, where Victor's men were visible as dark shapes in the heat shimmer. "They're going to try something different now, aren't they?" "Yeah. First attack was a test, see how we'd react. Now they know our positions, our numbers. Next time we'll be coordinated." "How long can we hold?" "Long as we have to." He touched her face, leaving a smudge of gunpowder on her cheek. "I meant what I said, Lydia. They're not taking you." "I know." She leaned into his touch for just a moment. "That's what scares me." A shout from outside made them both turn. Marcus was climbing down from the barn roof, waving urgently. Caleb and Lydia rushed out to meet him. "We got bigger problems," Marcus said, pointing east. "Look!" Caleb followed his gesture and felt his stomach drop. More riders were approaching from the opposite direction. At least a dozen, maybe more. Victor had reinforcements. "We can't hold against that many," Dutch said flatly, joining them. His face was gray with pain or exhaustion, or both. "We're already running low on ammunition." "Then we make them pay for every shot," Anna said. She was covered in soot from fighting the fire, her hair singed, but her grip on her rifle never wavered. "I didn't come all this way to surrender now." But Caleb was watching Marcus, who was squinting at the approaching riders with a strange expression. The ranger suddenly broke into a grin. "Those aren't reinforcements for Victor," Marcus said. "That's the cavalry. Look at the way they're riding. That's formation discipline. Those are lawmen." Hope surged through Caleb so strongly it made him dizzy. "You sure?" "I'd bet my badge on it. Someone must have intercepted my courier, sent help faster than I expected." The new riders came on at a gallop, and now Caleb could see what Marcus had seen. The organized way they moved, the glint of badges and rifles. They swept past Victor's regrouped men like a wave, and suddenly the attackers were caught between two forces, trapped in the open with nowhere to run. The fighting that followed was brief and brutal. Victor's men, already demoralized by the morning's losses, broke when they realized they were facing legitimate law enforcement. Some threw down their weapons immediately. Others tried to run and were chased down across the desert. A few died fighting, too committed or too stupid to quit. Victor himself tried to make a break for it, spurring his bay horse toward the southern canyons. But Marcus, mounting his own horse in one smooth motion, gave chase. Caleb watched the two riders disappear into the heat shimmer, heard the distant crack of rifle fire, and then silence. 20 minutes later, Marcus returned, leading Victor's horse with Victor slumped in the saddle, his hands bound, blood staining his expensive coat. His face was slack with shock and defeat. The lead marshal, a thick-shouldered man named Garrett, with a drooping mustache and tired eyes, dismounted and surveyed the scene with the air of someone who'd seen too much violence to be shocked by it. "You Marcus Hale?" he asked. "That's me. Got your message. Came as fast as we could." Garrett looked at the bodies scattered around the ranch, the smoke still rising from the burned shed, the wounded men groaning in the dirt. "Looks like we almost came too late." "But you didn't. That's what counts." Marcus gestured toward Caleb. "This is Caleb Rourke. It's his ranch, his fight." Garrett extended a hand and Caleb shook it, feeling the calluses that matched his own. "Hell of a stand you made here, Rourke. We'll need statements from everyone, but that can wait until we get the wounded taken care of. You got anyone needs urgent attention?" Dutch's boy took one in the leg, and some of Victor's men are still alive out there. "We'll round them up." Garrett turned to his deputies. "Johnson, Reeves, start collecting prisoners. Chen, see to the wounded, ours and theirs. Everyone else, secure the perimeter. I want this scene documented." As the marshals set to work with efficient professionalism, Caleb felt the adrenaline draining from his body, leaving him hollow and shaking. He walked back to the house on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Lydia met him at the door. For a long moment, they just stood there, staring at each other, both of them too wrung out for words. Then she collapsed against him, and he caught her, holding her while she sobbed against his chest. "It's over," he said quietly. "It's over." "Is it? Are you sure?" "Victor's in custody. His men are scattered or captured or dead. And you've got a whole platoon of federal marshals here now who'll make sure the truth gets out." He pulled back enough to look at her face. "Yeah, Lydia, it's over." She laughed through her tears, a sound somewhere between joy and hysteria. "I can't believe it. I've been running for so long I don't know how to stop." "Then don't stop. Just run toward something instead of away from it." He kissed her forehead. "Run toward this. Toward us." "Are you sure you still want an us? After everything? After all the lies?" "The only lie that matters is if you tell me you don't want to stay. Everything else we can work through." Before she could answer, Marshal Garrett appeared in the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt, but I need to speak with both of you, officially." They spent the next 2 hours giving statements, Lydia producing the ledger and explaining its contents in careful detail. Garrett's expression grew darker with each page he reviewed. "This is extensive," he said finally. "And if what you're telling me is true, if these names are accurate, this is going to ripple out across multiple territories. You understand what that means, Mrs. Rourke?" "I understand that powerful men are going to be angry. More than angry, desperate. Some of them will still have resources, connections. You might need protection for a while." "She's got protection," Caleb said flatly. "Right here." Garrett studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I believe you, but I'd still advise caution. Keep your head down for the next few months while we work through the arrests and trials. Don't go advertising your location. We live 40 miles from nowhere. I think we can manage that." After the marshals left, taking Victor and his surviving men with them, along with promises to return for follow-up interviews, an exhausted peace settled over Red Hollow Ranch. Dutch and his sons helped clean up the worst of the damage before heading home, Dutch's injured boy wrapped in bandages and dosed with laudanum. Anna stayed an extra day, helping repair the burned shed and board up bullet holes. You two are going to be famous once this story gets out, Anna told them over dinner that night. The rancher and his mail-order bride who brought down a criminal empire. They'll probably write books about you. I'd prefer they didn't, Lydia said quietly. Too late for that, honey. But look at it this way. Famous means protected. Hard for anyone to make you disappear when everyone knows your face. That night, after Anna had finally ridden off and they were truly alone for the first time since the attack, Caleb and Lydia sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of crimson and gold. I keep expecting to wake up and find this was all a dream, Lydia said. The good parts and the bad parts both. It's real. Caleb took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. All of it. What happens now? I mean, after the trials, after everything settles down, what do? We live. We work this ranch. We figure out what being married actually means when we're not running for our lives. He paused. If that's what you want. It is. She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the dying light. I know I came here under false pretenses. I know you didn't sign up for any of this, but somewhere along the way this stopped being about survival and started being about something else. Something real. Love? Maybe. Or the beginning of it, anyway. She smiled. Is that enough? It's more than enough. It's everything. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, the same stars that had watched over this land for millennia, indifferent to human drama. But Caleb didn't feel indifferent. He felt awake, alive, connected to something larger than his own solitary existence. The next few weeks brought a strange normalcy. The physical damage to the ranch was repaired. New boards replacing bullet-shattered wood, fresh paint covering scorch marks. Dutch sent over 2 of his cowboys to help with the work, and word spread through the scattered community about what had happened. People who'd never visited before found reasons to stop by, curious to meet the woman who'd defied Victor Grange's organization. Lydia handled the attention with more grace than Caleb expected. She was polite but reserved, answering questions without giving more information than necessary. But privately, he could see the toll it took. She had nightmares, waking in the dark hours with stifled screams. She flinched at unexpected sounds. She watched the horizon constantly, as if expecting another attack. It takes time, Marcus told Caleb during one of his visits. The ranger had become a regular presence, stopping by every few days to check on them and share news about the trials. What she went through, what you both went through, that doesn't heal overnight. Be patient. I'm trying. You're doing better than trying. You're doing well. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. Trust me, I've seen men handle this kind of thing a lot worse. The trials began in early November, held in Santa Fe with federal judges presiding. Caleb and Lydia made the journey twice to testify, staying in a small hotel that felt suffocatingly civilized after months on the ranch. The courtroom was packed with journalists, curiosity seekers, and the families of women who'd been victimized by Victor's operation. Victor himself sat in the defendant's box looking diminished, his expensive clothes replaced by prison gray, his confident smile long gone. When Lydia took the stand and began describing the operation in detail, the false promises, the blackmail, the violence, he wouldn't meet her eyes. Did you fear for your life when you fled? The prosecutor asked. Every day, Lydia answered. I still do sometimes, but staying would have been worse than dying. It would have meant giving up my humanity. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Victor Grange was convicted on 14 counts, including fraud, kidnapping, extortion, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 30 years in territorial prison. Others named in the ledger faced similar fates: corrupt sheriffs stripped of their badges, businessmen bankrupted and jailed, a network of exploitation systematically dismantled. But victory, Caleb learned, didn't always feel triumphant. On the ride back to Red Hollow after the final trial, Lydia was quiet, staring out at the passing landscape with distant eyes. What are you thinking? Caleb asked. That it's really over, that he can't hurt anyone else, that I can finally stop looking over my shoulder. She paused. And I'm thinking about all the women who weren't as lucky as me, the ones who didn't escape or who escaped but had nowhere to go. What happens to them? Some of them will come forward now that Victor's locked up. The marshals set up a fund to help them, and Marcus said there's talk of legislation to crack down on fraudulent matrimonial agencies. That's something, I suppose. She looked at him. Do you think we can really do this? Build a normal life after everything? I think we can try. That's all anyone can do. As winter settled over the ranch, bringing cold winds and occasional snow that dusted the desert white, Caleb and Lydia fell into a rhythm that felt increasingly like partnership. She proved to have a head for numbers and took over managing the ranch's finances, discovering inefficiencies Caleb had never noticed. He taught her to ride better, to read the land and the weather, to anticipate the needs of the cattle. They argued sometimes about money, about priorities, about whether to invest in more livestock or repair the irrigation system first. But the arguments felt healthy, productive, the kind married couples had when they were building something together. And slowly, carefully, they grew closer. Caleb moved his things into the main bedroom one night in December, neither of them discussing it beforehand, both of them simply understanding that the time had come. Their physical relationship developed with the same gradual care, tentative at first, then deepening into genuine intimacy. I was afraid I'd forgotten how to do this, Lydia whispered one night, her head on his chest. How to be close to someone without fear. You're doing fine. He stroked her hair. We both are. Christmas came, and they celebrated quietly with just the two of them, exchanging simple gifts. Caleb gave her a new book of poetry he'd ordered from a catalog. She gave him a shirt she'd sewn herself, the stitching perfect, the fit exact. They spent the day reading aloud to each other by the fire, and it was the best Christmas Caleb could remember. New Year brought Marcus with unexpected news. He arrived in the early afternoon, his horse lathered from hard riding, his face grim. What's wrong? Caleb asked as soon as he saw the ranger's expression. Victor escaped. The words hit like a physical blow. Lydia, who'd been hanging laundry, dropped the basket and went pale. How? Prison transfer. He was being moved to a more secure facility when the wagon was ambushed. 3 guards killed, 2 prisoners freed, including Victor. That was 4 days ago. We've been tracking them since, but the trail's gone cold. He's coming here, Lydia said flatly. He's coming for revenge. We don't know that, Marcus said, but his tone suggested he believed exactly that. I've got men watching the roads, and I sent word to every settlement and ranch within 50 miles. If he shows his face, we'll know. He won't show his face, Caleb said. He'll come quiet, come at night. He'll want us to feel safe first, let our guard down. Then we don't let our guard down. Marcus unslung his rifle. I'm staying here until we catch him. And I'm bringing in help. Dutch, Anna, whoever else we can trust. The next week passed in tense vigilance. Marcus set up a watch rotation, always keeping one person awake and armed. Anna arrived with 2 of her employees from the way station. Dutch sent his sons again, the younger one still limping but determined to help. The ranch house became a barracks, people sleeping in shifts, meals eaten quickly, conversation muted. But Victor didn't come. Days turned into a week, then 2. The constant tension began to fray nerves. People snapped at each other over small things. Lydia barely slept, her face growing gaunt, dark circles deepening under her eyes. This is what he wants, she said one morning, pacing the main room while others dozed in corners. He wants us afraid, wants us to tear ourselves apart waiting for him. He doesn't even have to show up. Just the threat of him is enough. So what do we do? Caleb asked. We live. We refuse to give him that power. She stopped pacing, turned to face him with something like her old determination. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life waiting for a monster. Either he comes or he doesn't, but I'm done being his victim. It was brave talk, and Caleb loved her for it. But he also saw the tremor in her hands, the way her eyes darted to every shadow. The break came 3 weeks after Marcus's warning. A prospector passing through reported seeing a camp in the canyons 15 miles south. 3 men, one matching Victor's description. Marcus organized a posse immediately. I'm coming, Caleb said. No, you stay here, protect your wife. This is law business now. Like hell, he made it personal when he attacked my home. They argued, but Marcus finally relented. Caleb kissed Lydia goodbye, promised to return, and rode out with Marcus and 6 deputized ranchers. Anna stayed behind to guard the ranch, her rifle across her knees, her eyes hard. The canyon country south of Red Hollow was a maze of red rock and hidden passages, easy to get lost in, easier still to stage an ambush. Marcus led them carefully, reading sign, moving slow. They found the camp just before sunset, cold fire pit, discarded supplies, signs of hasty departure. They knew we were coming, one of the deputies said. Or they finished whatever they were planning and moved on. Marcus studied the ground, his expression troubled. These tracks, they head north. North, toward Red Hollow. It's a trap, Caleb said, the realization hitting him like ice water. He wanted us out here. He's going for the ranch. They rode back through the gathering darkness, pushing their horses to the edge of endurance. Caleb's mind raced with terrible possibilities. Anna was good, but she was one woman against 3 men. Lydia was armed but traumatized. The other ranch hands had gone home days ago, exhausted by the long watch. The ranch came into view just as the moon rose, and Caleb's heart seized. Smoke. There was smoke rising from the barn. They thundered into the yard to find Anna on the porch, blood streaming from a gash on her forehead, her rifle in her hands. "They came 20 minutes ago," she gasped. 3 of them. I got one, wounded another, but they got past me. Victor went in the house." Caleb was off his horse before it stopped moving, hitting the door at a run. The main room was destroyed, furniture overturned, lamps shattered, signs of struggle everywhere. He followed the wreckage to the bedroom and found Lydia backed into a corner, the shotgun in her hands, Victor 5 feet away with a pistol pointed at her head. "Drop it," Victor said without looking away from Lydia. His voice was hoarse, desperate. "Drop the gun, Rourke, or I paint the wall with her brains." Caleb froze, his rifle halfway to his shoulder. Time seemed to stretch, every detail crystalline. The wild look in Victor's eyes, the trembling of Lydia's hands, the smell of smoke from the burning barn. "You can't win this," Caleb said, keeping his voice level. "The house is surrounded. You kill her, you die. You kill me, you die. There's no way out." "I don't care about getting out. I care about making her pay." Victor's finger tightened on the trigger. "She destroyed everything, my business, my reputation, my life. She deserves to die." "Maybe, but not by your hand." It was Lydia who spoke, her voice steady despite the shotgun shaking in her grip. "I've been afraid of you for so long, Victor. But looking at you now, all I feel is pity. You're a small man who hurt people because it made you feel big. And now you have nothing, no power, no future, just rage and failure. Shut up." "I won't, because you can't make me anymore. You can kill me, but you can't control me. And that's what really eats at you, isn't it? That I got away, that I exposed you, that I won." Victor's face twisted with fury, and something else, something that looked almost like anguish. His gun wavered. For one breath, too, Caleb thought he might actually lower it. Then Marcus appeared in the doorway behind Caleb, his rifle raised, and Victor saw him. The outlaw's expression hardened into something flat and dead. He started to turn his gun toward Marcus. Lydia pulled both triggers. The shotgun's roar in the enclosed space was deafening. Victor flew backward, crashing into the wall and sliding down, leaving a smear of red. His gun clattered on the floor. He tried to speak, blood bubbling on his lips, but no words came. Then he slumped sideways and was still. Lydia dropped the shotgun like it had burned her and collapsed. Caleb caught her, holding her while she shook violently, unable to speak or cry or even breathe properly. Marcus checked Victor's body, confirmed what they all knew, then quietly ushered everyone out of the room. They extinguished the barn fire before it could spread, captured Victor's 2 surviving accomplices hiding in the canyon, dealt with the aftermath of violence once again. But through it all, Caleb stayed with Lydia, holding her, speaking softly, anchoring her to the present. "It's over now," he kept saying. "It's really over. He can't hurt you anymore." Hours later, after the bodies had been removed and the marshals had taken their statements and the house had been cleaned as best they could manage, Caleb and Lydia sat on the porch watching the dawn. "I killed him," she said quietly. "I actually killed him. You defended yourself. Defended both of us. I know. And I can't say I'm sorry he's dead, but I never wanted to be someone who could take a life. Even his. You're still the same person, the woman who reads poetry and plants gardens and fights for what's right, This doesn't change that. She looked at him, her eyes red from crying but clear. Promise me something. Anything. Promise we'll fill this place with life now, with joy and hope and everything we've been fighting for. I don't want death to be the last thing that matters here. I promise. And as the sun rose over Red Hollow Ranch, painting everything gold, Caleb meant it with every fiber of his being. The promise Caleb made that dawn wasn't one he could fulfill overnight, and both of them knew it. The bedroom where Victor had died remained closed for 3 weeks, neither of them able to bring themselves to enter it. They slept in the small guest room instead, cramped but together, and some nights Caleb would wake to find Lydia staring at the ceiling, her eyes wide and haunted in the moonlight filtering through the curtains. "Tell me something good," she would whisper on those nights. "Tell me about the future." And he would. He'd talk about expanding the herd, about building a new barn to replace the one damaged by fire, about maybe getting chickens and planting an orchard. He'd describe grandchildren neither of them had yet, holidays filled with laughter, ordinary days stretching out like a gift. Sometimes she'd fall back asleep listening. Other times she'd cry silently, and he'd hold her until morning. Marcus came by a week after Victor's death with official papers and unexpected news. They sat at the kitchen table while Lydia made coffee, her movements automatic, her face carefully neutral. "The territorial governor wants to meet you both," Marcus said, sliding a formal letter across the scarred wood. "There's going to be some kind of ceremony. Recognition for exposing the trafficking ring, for your bravery. They're calling you heroes." "We're not heroes," Lydia said sharply, setting down cups with enough force to slosh coffee onto the table. "We're survivors. There's a difference. I know that. You know that. But to everyone else, you're the woman who brought down Victor Grange, and Caleb's the rancher who stood his ground against impossible odds. That story means something to people." Marcus softened his voice. "I'm not saying you have to like it. I'm just saying it's happening whether you want it or not." Caleb looked at Lydia, saw the tightness around her mouth, the way her hands clenched the coffee cup. "We'll think about it," he told Marcus. "No promises." After the ranger left, Lydia stood at the window staring out at the desert, her shoulders rigid. Caleb came up behind her, not touching, just offering his presence. "I don't want to be a symbol," she said quietly. "I don't want people looking at me and seeing some inspirational story when all I see is blood and fear and the man I killed. Then we don't go. We stay here, tell them to send their medals somewhere else." "But that's not fair to you, is it? You did stand your ground. You did risk everything to protect me. You deserve recognition." "I deserve a quiet life with my wife. That's all I want." He turned her gently to face him. "Lydia, I don't need strangers telling me what we did was brave. I was there. I know what it cost. And I know we're still paying for it." She searched his face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, we'll write them a polite letter declining the honor. Maybe suggest they put that energy into helping the other women instead." They did write the letter, though the governor's office wasn't pleased. More letters followed, some understanding, others accusatory. One journalist called them ungrateful. Another speculated that Lydia was mentally unstable from her ordeal. The attention they'd hoped to avoid by staying away only intensified, turning them into mysterious figures of speculation. "Should have just gone to the damn ceremony," Caleb muttered one evening, throwing another envelope into the fire unread. "No, we made the right choice. They'll get tired eventually and find someone else to obsess over." She was right, though it took longer than either of them hoped. Spring arrived, bringing warmth and new grass and the annual ritual of checking the herd for new calves. Caleb threw himself into the work with an intensity that bordered on obsession, riding out before dawn and returning after dark. His body aching, but his mind finally quiet. Lydia worked just as hard in her own way. She reopened the bedroom, stripped everything down to bare walls, and methodically repainted it a soft cream color that caught the morning light. She burned the old mattress in a cleansing fire that seemed to satisfy something deep inside her, then ordered a new one from a catalog, along with fresh linens and curtains patterned with wildflowers. "It's just a room now," she told Caleb when she finished. "Not a shrine to what happened, just a room where we can sleep." They christened it that night, making love with a tenderness that felt like reclaiming territory. Afterward, Lydia traced the scar on Caleb's shoulder, a reminder of a bullet that had grazed him during the first attack, and kissed it gently. I never thanked you properly, she said. For what? For believing me. For not sending me away when you learned the truth. For standing with me when you could have just handed me over and saved yourself. I wasn't raised to hand over people who need help. Most men wouldn't have made that choice. Most men would have seen me as the problem, not the victim. She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. You're a rare breed, Caleb Rourke. Or just stubborn. That too. She smiled and it reached her eyes for the first time in weeks. But I'll take stubborn if it means you're mine. As spring deepened into early summer, life at Red Hollow found a rhythm that felt sustainable. The nightmares didn't disappear, but they came less frequently. Lydia's startle reflex eased. Caleb stopped unconsciously checking the horizon for riders every few minutes. They began to believe, tentatively, that peace might actually hold. Dutch and his sons came by one afternoon with an unexpected proposal. The old rancher had aged noticeably since his injury, moving stiffly, his breathing labored, but his mind was sharp as ever. I'm getting too old for this country, Dutch said without preamble, settling into a chair on the porch. My boys want to move to California, try their luck with farming out there. And I'm thinking I might go with them, see the ocean before I die. That's a big change, Caleb said, though he could see where this was headed. It is. Which brings me to why I'm here. I'm selling the ranch. Already got an offer from some speculator back east, but I wanted to give you first refusal. Our properties adjoin, you take mine, you'd have near 300 acres, big enough to run a serious operation. Caleb's mind raced with possibilities. 300 acres would transform Red Hollow from a marginal operation to something genuinely prosperous. But it would also mean debt, expansion, hiring help. It would mean commitment to this place in a way that made leaving impossible if circumstances changed. That's generous, Dutch. Can I think about it? Course, but don't think too long. That speculator's offering cash money, and I need to settle things before winter. After Dutch left, Caleb and Lydia walked the boundary between their properties, looking at the land with new eyes. It was good grazing, with a spring-fed creek that never ran dry and natural shelter from winter storms. We could do something real here, Caleb said. Build not just a ranch, but a legacy. Maybe have kids someday. Give them something solid. Lydia was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. When she did, her voice was carefully controlled. Is that what you want? Children? Eventually, maybe, if you want them too, if you think you're ready for that. I don't know if I'll ever be ready. She sat down on a flat rock, pulling her knees up to her chest. What if I'm a terrible mother? What if I can't protect them? What if I pass on all this fear and damage? Caleb sat beside her, taking her hand. You survived things that would have broken most people. You fought back when it would have been easier to give up. You exposed corruption that was hurting vulnerable women across multiple territories. A woman who can do all that? I think she'd make a pretty fierce mother. That's not the same as being a good one. Maybe not, but we've got time to figure it out. We don't have to decide today or this year. We can just take it one day at a time, see where life leads us. She leaned against his shoulder, and they sat watching the sun paint the western sky in shades of amber and rose. Finally, she said, let's buy the land. Even if we never have children, even if it's just us, let's build something that lasts. They borrowed money from the bank in Socorro, using Red Hollow as collateral, and closed the deal with Dutch in early June. The transaction was simple. A handshake, signed papers, and keys to a ranch house Dutch had built 30 years ago when he'd still believed in fresh starts. You take care of this place, Dutch told them as he prepared to leave. And Caleb, you take care of that woman. She's tougher than she looks, but even the tough ones need someone watching their back. I know. Good. Then I'll sleep easy knowing the land's in good hands. They watched Dutch and his sons ride away, the wagon piled high with possessions accumulated over decades. Then Caleb and Lydia walked across their expanded property, planning improvements and dreaming aloud about the future. The work of combining two ranches into one coherent operation consumed the rest of summer. They hired 2 cowhands, young men from town looking for honest work, and taught them the land, the rhythms, the unspoken language of managing livestock. Lydia surprised everyone by revealing a talent for horse training, gentling a wild Mustang Caleb had caught with patience and skill that left the hired hands shaking their heads in admiration. "Where'd you learn to do that?" one of them asked, watching her work the horse in a round pen. "My father broke horses before he died," Lydia said, not breaking her focus on the animal. "I watched him work until I understood it wasn't about domination. It's about trust, making the horse believe you're the safest thing in its world." Caleb, listening from the fence, felt something shift in his understanding of his wife. She'd told him about her father's death when she was young, but she'd never mentioned this skill, this connection to animals that mirrored his own. It was a reminder that despite everything they'd been through together, there were still depths to discover. That evening, as they were settling in for the night, Caleb asked, "What else don't I know about you?" Lydia looked up from the book she was reading, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean today, watching you with that horse, I realized you've probably got a dozen skills and stories I've never heard, and I want to know them all. Not because I need to, but because I want to understand every part of you." She set down her book, considering. "I can sew, not just mending, but actual tailoring. I used to make dresses for wealthy women back in St. Louis. I'm good with numbers, which is why managing the ranch books comes naturally. I speak a little French because my mother was from New Orleans. I can shoot better than I let on during the attack. I was just terrified I'd hit you by accident." She paused. "And I used to sing in church before my aunt died. I haven't sung since, but sometimes I miss it." "Sing something now." "Caleb, please. I want to hear what your voice sounds like when it's not afraid." So she did. Sitting there in the lamplight, she sang an old ballad about love and loss, her voice clear and achingly beautiful. Caleb felt something unlock in his chest, a tenderness so sharp it almost hurt. When she finished, there were tears on her cheeks, but she was smiling. "That felt good," she said wonderingly. "I'd forgotten how good it felt." "You should do it more often. Fill this house with music." "Maybe I will." Summer gave way to autumn, bringing cooler temperatures and the hard work of preparing for winter. They slaughtered steers for meat, stacked firewood, repaired fences that would need to withstand snow and ice. The hired hands proved their worth, working without complaint from dawn to dusk. One afternoon in late September, Anna Birch arrived unexpectedly, her black mare dusty from hard riding. She looked older than Caleb remembered, the scar on her face more prominent, but her eyes were bright with purpose. "Got news," Anna said, accepting coffee and settling at the kitchen table. "Good news for once. The territorial legislature passed new laws regulating matrimonial agencies, background checks, bonding requirements, right of refusal. They're calling it the Ashford Act." Lydia's cup froze halfway to her lips. "The Ashford Act?" "Named after you, honey, after what you exposed. It's not perfect, but it'll make it a lot harder for men like Victor to operate. And there's more. A fund's been established to help women who are victimized. They're getting the medical care, legal assistance, help finding legitimate work, or returning home if they want." Anna smiled. "Your courage did that. You standing up made it possible for others to stand up too." "How many women have come forward?" Lydia asked quietly. Last count was 47. More every week as word spreads that it's safe to talk. Some of them are testifying against the men who exploited them. Others just want help disappearing into new lives, but they're all getting a chance they didn't have before. After Anna left, Lydia was quiet for hours, processing. Finally, as they were preparing for bed, she said, "Maybe it wasn't all for nothing. Maybe the nightmares and the fear and the killing, maybe it bought something worth having." "It did. You saved a lot of women, Lydia, more than you'll ever meet or know about. That matters. I just wish it didn't have to cost so much. All good things do. That's what makes them good." Winter arrived with unusual ferocity, bringing snowstorms that buried the ranch under drifts that reached the porch roof. They lost 3 head of cattle to the cold despite their best efforts, found them frozen in a gully where they'd sought shelter. It was a harsh reminder that no matter how much they planned and prepared, the frontier still demanded its price. But the losses brought the ranch family closer. The 2 hired hands moved into Dutch's old house, close enough to help in emergencies but far enough to give Caleb and Lydia privacy. They shared meals when the weather allowed, swapped stories around the fire, became something more than employer and employees. They became friends. One particularly brutal night in January, when the wind howled like a living thing and the temperature dropped so low the water in the bucket by the door froze solid, Lydia woke Caleb with urgent shaking. "Something's wrong," she said, her voice tight with pain. "Caleb, something's really wrong." He lit the lamp with shaking hands and saw blood on the sheets. Lydia was curled on her side, her face white with pain and shock, and he understood, with a sickening lurch, what was happening. "How long?" he asked, already pulling on clothes. "I don't know. I didn't even know I was pregnant. My courses have been irregular since everything happened. I thought it was just stress." She gasped as another cramp hit. "I can't lose this baby, Caleb. I didn't know I wanted it until right now, but I can't lose it." The nearest doctor was in Socorro, 20 miles away through snowdrifts and killing cold. But there was someone closer. Anna Birch had mentioned once, in passing, that she'd helped deliver babies at her way station when travelers got caught in bad weather. "Hold on," Caleb told Lydia. "Just hold on, I'm getting help." He rode through the blizzard like a man possessed, his horse struggling through drifts, the cold so intense it burned his lungs. He nearly missed Anna's way station entirely, would have if not for a lamp in the window. He pounded on the door until she answered, took one look at his face, and grabbed her medical kit without asking questions. They made the return journey together, Anna's horse following Caleb's through the trail he'd already broken. By the time they reached the ranch house, Caleb was beyond cold, beyond fear, existing in a state of pure determination. Anna took charge with the calm efficiency of someone who'd seen everything. She examined Lydia, spoke to her in low, soothing tones, and then set about doing what could be done. Caleb waited in the main room, useless and terrified, listening to his wife's muffled cries. Dawn was breaking when Anna finally emerged, looking exhausted but not defeated. "She's sleeping," Anna said, "and she's going to be all right. The baby too, I think. She's maybe 2 months along, too early to be certain, but the bleeding stopped and her vitals are strong. She needs rest, needs to take it easy for the next few weeks, but I believe they'll both pull through." Caleb felt his legs go weak with relief. "Thank you. I don't know what we would have done without you." "You'd have managed. You always do." Anna squeezed his shoulder. "But I'm glad I could help. That woman of yours has been through enough. She deserves some happiness." He sat with Lydia all that day, dozing in the chair beside the bed, waking every time she stirred. When she finally opened her eyes, late in the afternoon, the first thing she asked was, "The baby?" "Still there. Anna says you both just need rest." Tears slid down her temples into her hair. "I didn't know I could be this scared and this happy at the same time. That's parenthood, I guess. Get used to it." She laughed weakly. "You're going to be a father, Caleb. Are you ready for that?" "Probably not. But I wasn't ready to be a husband either, and look how that turned out." "Terrifyingly well?" "Exactly." The rest of winter passed slowly as Lydia recovered her strength. Anna visited weekly at first, then every few days, monitoring her condition and offering advice that ranged from herbal remedies to stern warnings about overexertion. Marcus stopped by when the weather allowed, bringing news from the outside world and packages of books and supplies they'd ordered from catalogs. "You're building something here," Marcus observed one afternoon, looking around at the improved ranch, the healthy livestock, the additions they'd made to the house. "Something real and lasting." "That's the plan," Caleb agreed. "Good. Country needs more of that. People willing to put down roots and fight for them." Marcus paused. "Speaking of which, territorial elections are coming up. Some folks have been talking about putting my name forward for sheriff of the county. If that happens, I'd want your endorsement. Your names carry weight now, whether you like it or not." "You'd make a good sheriff," Lydia said from the porch, where she was sitting wrapped in blankets despite the improving weather. "Honest, competent, and you actually care about helping people instead of just wearing a badge." "That's what I'm hoping folks see. But it means I'd be based in Socorro, not patrolling the back country as much. You two would need to be more self-reliant." "We can handle that," Caleb said. "We've been handling it." As spring returned and Lydia's pregnancy became obvious to everyone, the ranch took on a different energy. The hired hands tiptoed around her, treating her like she might break, until she finally snapped at them that being pregnant didn't make her an invalid. They laughed nervously and went back to normal, though Caleb noticed they still kept a protective eye on her when they thought she wasn't looking. Lydia bloomed in the warm weather, her fear giving way to a fierce protectiveness for the life growing inside her. She read every book about childbirth and infant care she could find, drove Caleb mad with questions about how to baby-proof the ranch, and began sewing tiny clothes with determined intensity. "I'm going to be ready this time," she told him one evening, working on a miniature shirt by lamplight. "I'm not going to let anyone hurt this child. Not the way I was hurt. No one's going to get the chance. Our child will grow up safe, loved, and free. I promise you that." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I know what you're capable of when someone threatens what you love. And I know what I'm capable of. Any threat to this child will have to go through both of us." She looked at him with such love it took his breath away. "Sometimes I can't believe this is real, that I found you, that we survived everything, that we get to have this." "Believe it. It's as real as it gets." The baby came in early July, arriving during a thunderstorm that shook the house with its fury. Anna was there, having moved into the spare room 2 weeks earlier to be ready. Marcus rode out despite the weather, bringing actual doctor from Socorro who'd agreed to make the journey in exchange for a generous fee. Caleb paid without hesitation. The labor was long and difficult, Lydia's screams cutting through the thunder, and there were moments when Caleb feared he might lose them both. But dawn broke clear and perfect, and with it came a thin, angry wail that was the most beautiful sound Caleb had ever heard. "It's a girl," Anna said, wrapping the baby in clean cloth and placing her in Lydia's arms. Perfect in every way. Lydia stared down at her daughter with wonder and terror and overwhelming love. The baby was red and wrinkled and impossibly small, her tiny fists waving, her eyes scrunched shut against the light. "Hello," Lydia whispered. "Hello, little one. We've been waiting for you." Caleb leaned over them both, touching his daughter's head with one finger, marveling at her fragility. "What should we name her?" Lydia thought for a moment, then smiled. "Hope. Her name is Hope, because that's what she is, proof that something beautiful can come from darkness." "Hope Rourke," Caleb said, testing the name. "I like it. Welcome home, Hope." The first weeks of Hope's life were a blur of sleepless nights, constant worry, and joy so intense it felt almost painful. Caleb discovered he could function on 2 hours of sleep if it meant rocking his daughter while she fussed. Lydia learned to nurse while reading, while eating, while managing ranch accounts. They moved through their days in a haze of exhaustion and wonder. The ranch hands became unofficial uncles, taking turns holding Hope when work allowed, making silly faces to earn her smiles. Anna visited often, bringing supplies and advice, and the kind of gruff affection that suggested she'd grown genuinely fond of this odd little family. Marcus stopped by when his duties as the newly elected sheriff allowed, bouncing Hope on his knee and telling her stories about her parents' bravery that made both Caleb and Lydia uncomfortable. "Don't tell her those stories," Lydia protested. "I don't want her growing up thinking violence is the answer to everything." "I'm not going to lie to her about who her parents are," Marcus countered. "She deserves to know she comes from people who stood up for what's right, who didn't back down when things got hard. She'll learn that by watching us live, not by hearing war stories." But as Hope grew from infant to baby, from baby to toddler taking her first unsteady steps, Caleb found himself thinking more and more about legacy. What would they tell her about how they met, about the violence that had marked the beginning of their marriage? How much of the truth did a child need to know? "We tell her the truth," Lydia said when he voiced these thoughts. "Age-appropriate versions as she grows, but the truth. That her mother was in danger, that her father protected her, that together they built something good from something terrible. We don't hide the darkness, but we don't dwell on it either. And if she asks why someone wanted to hurt you, we tell her that sometimes people do evil things, and that's why good people have to stand up. We teach her to be strong, to be brave, to help others who can't help themselves." It sounded simple when Lydia said it, but Caleb knew raising a child on the frontier would be anything but. Still, watching Hope toddle across the porch, her laughter bright as sunlight, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: genuine, uncomplicated happiness. The ranch continued to prosper. With 300 acres and careful management, they built a sustainable operation that provided more than mere survival. They hired more help, expanded the herd, built a new barn that was better than the old one had ever been. The house grew too, with additions for the growing family and improvements that made life more comfortable. And through it all, Caleb and Lydia grew deeper into their partnership. The marriage that had started as a desperate gamble became something neither of them had dared to hope for. A true union built on respect, trust, and love that deepened with every shared challenge. On their third anniversary, Caleb gave Lydia a gift he'd been working on in secret for months. It was a book, hand-bound in leather, filled with pressed flowers from the ranch, and his own careful handwriting documenting their story. "So we remember," he told her as she turned the pages with tears in her eyes. "So hope knows someday. So we never forget where we came from or how hard we fought to get here." "It's beautiful," Lydia whispered. "Thank you." That night, after Hope was asleep and the ranch was quiet, they sat on the porch as they had so many times before, watching the stars emerge in the vast desert sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Lydia asked suddenly. "Answering my letter, bringing me here, everything that followed." Caleb considered the question seriously, knowing it deserved a real answer. "I regret the violence. I regret that people died. I regret that you had to kill to defend us. But do I regret you? Never. Not for a single moment. Even knowing what it would cost? Especially knowing that. Because the cost measured the worth. And Lydia, you and Hope, you're worth everything." She leaned against him, and they sat in comfortable silence. Two people who'd found each other across distance and desperation, who'd built something lasting from the raw materials of hope and determination. The frontier was still hard. Winters still tested their endurance. Drought and disease still threatened the herd. The work was endless and the rewards uncertain. But they faced it together, and that made all the difference. As Hope approached her second birthday, Red Hollow Ranch had transformed into something Caleb could never have imagined in those early days of solitude. The main house had been expanded twice now, with a proper nursery painted sunny yellow and a kitchen large enough to feed the ranch hands who'd become permanent fixtures in their lives. The barn stood tall and proud, replacing the one scarred by fire, and a new stable housed 8 horses, including the Mustang Lydia had gentled, now the gentlest mount on the property. But prosperity brought new challenges that neither Caleb nor Lydia had anticipated. It started with a letter that arrived in late autumn, delivered by a well-dressed man riding an expensive horse. Marcus brought it out to the ranch himself, his expression troubled in a way that made Caleb's instincts prickle with unease. "This came to my office," Marcus said, handing over an envelope embossed with a lawyer's seal from back east. "I opened it thinking it was official business, but it's addressed to Lydia, or rather, to Mrs. Eliza Vale Rourke, also known as Lydia Ashford." Lydia took the envelope with trembling hands, her face going pale. She opened it slowly, read in silence, then sat down heavily on the porch steps. "What is it?" Caleb asked, moving to her side. "It's from a law firm in Philadelphia. They represent the estate of Margaret Vale." Her voice was hollow. Apparently, the real Eliza Vale's mother survived her daughter's death and recently passed away herself. She left a substantial inheritance to her only child, not knowing Eliza had died years ago. Now the lawyers have traced the name to me, to the marriage certificate, to the legal documents I signed using her identity. "What are they saying?" Lydia's hands crumpled the letter. "They're accusing me of identity fraud, of illegally assuming another person's identity to obtain property and money through marriage. They want the inheritance, obviously, but they're also threatening criminal charges unless I can prove I didn't know Eliza Vale was dead when I used her name." "But you did know," Marcus said quietly. "That was the whole point, finding a dead person's identity to hide from Victor. Which makes me guilty of exactly what they're accusing me of." Lydia looked up at Caleb with eyes full of fear he hadn't seen since Victor's death. "They could invalidate our marriage, take Hope away, send me to prison. Everything we've built could disappear because I used a dead woman's name." Caleb felt rage building in his chest, hot and dangerous. "That's not going to happen. We'll fight this." "With what? We're ranchers, Caleb, not lawyers. These people have resources we can't match. And worst of all, they're not wrong. I did commit fraud. I did use someone else's identity illegally." "You did it to survive," Marcus interjected. "You were fleeing a criminal organization that was hunting you. Any reasonable court would see that as extenuating circumstances. Maybe. Or maybe they'll see a woman who lied about who she was, married under false pretenses, and has been living a fraudulent life for years. Lydia stood abruptly, pacing. I need to think. I need to figure out what to do. The legal threat hung over the ranch like storm clouds for the next several weeks. Lydia consulted with lawyers in Socorro and Santa Fe, spending money they'd been saving for ranch improvements on legal fees that mounted alarmingly. The consensus was troubling. While her circumstances were sympathetic, the law was clear. She had committed identity fraud, and the marriage certificate bore a false name. There are options, the lawyer in Santa Fe explained during one tense meeting. We could argue necessity, that you had no choice. We could point to the subsequent validation of the marriage under your real name, though that happened after the fact. We could challenge the standing of the estate to bring criminal charges. But none of these are guarantees, Mrs. Rourke. The law doesn't always account for human complexity. What are our chances? Caleb asked bluntly. In a trial, 60-40 in your favor, maybe. The judge would have broad discretion, but trials are expensive, drawn out, and public. Everything about Victor Grange, the trafficking ring, the violence, it would all be dragged out again. And there's always the risk of losing. What's the alternative? Settlement. The estate wants the inheritance money, $15,000. If Mrs. Rourke signs away any claim to it and agrees to public acknowledgement of the identity fraud with a formal apology, they'll drop the criminal complaint. $15,000 might as well have been $1 million for all the chance they had of paying it. Caleb and Lydia sat in the lawyer's office, holding hands, feeling the weight of impossible choices. I'll do it, Lydia said finally. I'll sign whatever they want. I don't care about the money, and I can survive public humiliation, but I won't risk losing hope or going to prison. Wait, Caleb said. There might be another way. He explained his idea on the long ride back to Red Hollow. It was risky and would require swallowing considerable pride, but it might work. That evening, he sat down and wrote a letter to the territorial governor's office, the same office that had wanted to honor them months ago. In careful, honest language, he explained the situation. He detailed Lydia's circumstances, the reasons for the identity fraud, the subsequent validation of their marriage. He outlined the legal threat and the impossible settlement demand. And then he asked for something he'd never asked for in his life: help. You wanted to make us symbols, he wrote. You wanted to celebrate what we did, hold us up as examples of frontier justice and courage. Well, here's your chance to prove that meant something more than empty words. My wife is being punished for surviving. She's being threatened with prison for the crime of escaping victimization. If the territory truly values what we did, if the Ashford Act and all the women it's helping mean anything, then help us now when it actually matters. He mailed the letter with little hope it would make a difference. Politicians made grand gestures when cameras were watching, but real help for real people was harder to come by. He was wrong. 10 days later, Marcus arrived with a telegram from the governor's office. The territory was sending its attorney general to intervene in the case, arguing that Lydia's identity fraud was inextricably linked to her role in exposing the trafficking ring and should be treated as part of a criminal investigation, not a separate civil matter. Furthermore, they were filing a counterclaim against the Vale estate for harassment of a witness in ongoing criminal proceedings. They're going to war for you, Marcus said, grinning. The Attorney General himself is coming to Socorro to handle the case personally. He says, and I quote, "The territory does not abandon those who serve justice at great personal cost." Lydia read the telegram 3 times, tears streaming down her face. I can't believe it. I actually can't believe people in power are helping instead of hurting. Believe it. You earned it. Marcus squeezed her shoulder. Though I suspect the governor also saw good politics in defending you. The newspapers have picked up the story. War widow of Red Hollow faces legal persecution. Public sentiment is on your side. The legal battle that followed was mercifully brief. The Attorney General was a formidable man named Harrison Cole, who'd built his career on high-profile cases and had a gift for swaying judges. He argued that the identity fraud was a survival mechanism employed by a woman fleeing organized crime, that she'd corrected the legal record as soon as it was safe to do so, and that punishing her now would send a chilling message to other victims who might otherwise come forward. The Vale Estate's lawyers, facing the full weight of territorial authority and increasingly hostile press coverage, folded. They dropped the criminal complaint and settled for a token acknowledgement that their client's name had been used without permission. The inheritance was awarded to distant cousins who'd never known Eliza Vale existed. "It's over," Cole told them after the final hearing. "Your marriage is legally valid under both names. There will be no criminal charges, and the estate has agreed never to contact you again." Caleb and Lydia walked out of the courthouse into bright November sunshine, blinking like people emerging from a cave. The relief was so profound it left them giddy. "We're really free?" Lydia asked. "We're really free." They went to dinner at the nicest restaurant in Socorro, a small place with actual tablecloths and food they didn't have to cook themselves. Hope sat in Lydia's lap, grabbing at silverware and babbling in her own mysterious language. They toasted with glasses of wine that cost more than they should have spent, and for one evening they let themselves celebrate without fear. But on the ride home, as the stars emerged and Hope slept between them in the wagon, Lydia grew quiet. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked. "That this won't be the last time. There will always be something, someone from my past, some consequence of the choices I made, some threat we have to face. I keep waiting for the moment when it's finally over, when we can just be a normal family. But maybe that's not possible. Maybe we're always going to be the people this happened to. Maybe. But we're also the people who survived it, who built something good from it. That counts for something. Does it count enough?" Caleb guided the horse around a rock, thinking. "I don't know if there's such a thing as enough when it comes to the past. It's always there, always part of who we are. But it doesn't have to be all of who we are. Look at Hope. She's new, clean, untouched by any of it. We get to raise her in a world where she doesn't have to be afraid the way you were afraid. That's not nothing." "No, it's everything." Lydia leaned against his shoulder. "I just get tired sometimes. Tired of fighting, tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of waiting for the next crisis." "I know, me too. But we rest when we can and fight when we must. That's all anyone can do." Winter settled in early that year, bringing snow in December that stayed on the ground through January. The ranch work continued, but at a slower pace, allowing for evenings by the fire, for teaching Hope her first words, for the quiet domesticity that Caleb had once thought was only for other people. One evening, while Lydia was putting Hope to bed, there was a knock at the door. Caleb opened it to find a woman standing in the cold, her face wind-burned, her clothes worn but clean. She looked to be in her 30s, with blonde hair escaping from a threadbare scarf and eyes that held the kind of wariness Caleb recognized immediately. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice shaking from cold or nerves or both. "My name is Sarah Winters. I was one of Victor Grange's women. I saw your names in the newspaper about the trial, and I was hoping, I didn't know where else to go." Caleb stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in. Get warm. Are you hungry?" She entered hesitantly, like an animal expecting a trap. Up close, Caleb could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 25, but life had marked her hard. There were scars on her hands and a hollowness to her face that spoke of insufficient food and too much fear. Lydia emerged from the bedroom and froze when she saw their visitor. For a long moment, the two women stared at each other, and Caleb saw recognition pass between them, not of faces, but of shared experience. "You were in St. Louis," Lydia said quietly, "at the agency. I remember seeing you there before Victor sent me to Kansas." Sarah nodded. "You looked so hopeful. We all did, at the beginning." "Sit down. I'll make coffee." Lydia moved to the stove, her movements automatic. "Tell us what happened. Tell us how we can help." Over the next hour, Sarah told her story. It was horrifyingly similar to Lydia's, the false promises, the forced marriage, the blackmail, the violence. But Sarah hadn't been as lucky or as clever as Lydia. She'd been caught trying to escape, beaten severely, sold to a brothel in Colorado. She'd spent 2 years there before the Ashford Act, and the subsequent investigations gave her the courage to testify. "They promised me protection, said I'd be safe once I came forward," Sarah said, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup. "And for a while it was true. But then the trials ended, the attention moved on, and I was just another woman with a past and no future. I tried to find work, but no one wants to hire someone like me. I tried to go home, but my family, they said I'd brought shame on them." "So you came here," Caleb said. "I didn't know what else to do. The newspaper said you were living here, building a ranch, And I thought maybe people who'd been through it would understand, would help. She looked between them desperately. I can work. I'm strong. I learn fast. I don't need much, just a place to stay, and maybe enough money to eventually start over somewhere. Lydia looked at Caleb, a question in her eyes. He nodded slightly. They'd discussed this possibility before, what they'd do if women from Victor's operation came seeking help. They'd hoped it wouldn't happen, but they'd always known it might. You can stay, Lydia said. We have a small cabin behind the barn that we use for storage. It needs cleaning, but it's weatherproof. You can stay there, help around the ranch. We can't pay much, but you'll have food and shelter and safety for as long as you need it. Sarah's face crumpled, and she sobbed with relief. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll work hard, I promise. I won't be a burden. You're not a burden. You're someone who deserves a chance. We all do. Sarah stayed, and true to her word, she worked harder than anyone had a right to expect. She cleaned the cabin until it gleamed, helped Lydia with cooking and childcare, assisted the ranch hands with every task they'd allow. She was quiet, skittish around the men at first, but gradually she began to relax, to smile occasionally, to show glimpses of who she might have been before Victor Grange destroyed her innocence. But she wasn't the last. Word spread through the informal network of women who'd survived Victor's operation, traveling from town to town in whispered conversations and careful letters. By spring, 2 more women had arrived at Red Hollow, one from Texas, another from Kansas, both carrying similar stories of exploitation and survival. We're becoming a refuge, Lydia said one evening, watching the 3 women share a meal in Sarah's cabin. I didn't plan this, but I'm not sure I can turn them away. Then we don't, Caleb said. We figure out how to make it work. They converted the old storage shed into a bunkhouse, hired the women as legitimate ranch hands, taught them skills that would serve them whether they stayed or eventually moved on. It wasn't charity. The ranch needed the extra help, and the women proved capable once given the chance. But it was something more than simple employment. It was healing for all of them. Sarah thrived especially. She had a gift with numbers that rivaled Lydia's and took over managing the ranch's financial records. She taught the other women to read and write in the evenings, passing on education she'd somehow maintained through everything. And slowly, painfully, she began to reclaim her sense of self-worth. I never thought I'd feel human again, she told Lydia one afternoon while they were hanging laundry. After everything that happened, after all the ways I was used and hurt, I thought I was broken forever. But here, doing honest work, being treated like a person instead of property, it's like learning to breathe again. You were always human, Lydia said. What was done to you doesn't change that. Maybe, but I forgot it for a while. You helped me remember. The ranch's transformation into an unofficial sanctuary changed its dynamic in ways both beautiful and complicated. Hope grew up surrounded by women who treated her like a beloved niece, learning early that family was about choice as much as blood. The ranch hands adjusted to the presence of women who flinched at sudden movements and needed patience, and in the process became gentler, more thoughtful men. But there were challenges too. Some of the women carried wounds too deep to heal quickly. Nightmares were common, as were bouts of depression or anger. Lydia found herself serving as counselor and confidant, drawing on her own experience to help others navigate their trauma. It was exhausting work that left her drained some evenings, questioning whether they were really helping or just collecting broken people. You're helping, Caleb assured her during one particularly difficult period when one of the women had tried to run away in the middle of the night, convinced she was being hunted. Look at Sarah. Look at the progress they're all making. Healing isn't linear, but it is happening. I just wish I knew how to make it easier for them. You can't. You can only be there while they do the hard work themselves. That's what you're doing. That's enough. Summer brought Anna Birch for an extended visit, and the older woman surveyed the transformed ranch with approval. You've built something remarkable here, Anna told Caleb and Lydia one evening as they watched the ranch hands, male and female both, work together to repair a fence. Not just a ranch, but a community, a place where people can start over. It happened by accident, Lydia said. I never intended to run a refuge. The best things usually do happen by accident, but what matters is what you do once they're happening. You're giving these women something precious, not just safety, but purpose. Anna paused. You should formalize it. Make it official. There are resources available for operations like this, funding from the territory for helping victims of crimes. I don't want to turn this into some kind of institution, Lydia protested. These women aren't patients or inmates, they're just people trying to rebuild their lives. Which is exactly why you should get support doing it. You can't fund this indefinitely out of ranch profits, and if word continues to spread, more women will come. Better to be prepared. It was practical advice, and after much discussion, Caleb and Lydia decided to take it. They filed paperwork with the territorial government, formally designating part of the ranch as a rehabilitation program for victims of fraud and trafficking. The bureaucracy was tedious, but it brought modest funding and, more importantly, legal protections for both the ranch and the women they were helping. The program attracted attention from newspapers again, this time positive coverage that framed Red Hollow Ranch as a model for helping survivors rebuild their lives. Journalists came to interview the residents, though Caleb and Lydia were careful to protect the women's privacy, allowing only those who wanted to speak to do so. One journalist, a young woman from a Santa Fe paper named Catherine Mills, spent a week at the ranch documenting daily life. Her subsequent article painted a picture of hard work and hope, of women finding strength in community and purpose in honest labor. What you've created here challenges the prevailing narrative about women like these, Catherine told Lydia during their final conversation. Society wants to either pity them as helpless victims or condemn them as fallen women. You're showing a third option, that they're simply people who deserve the same chances anyone else gets. That's all we've ever tried to do. Give people chances. It's revolutionary, whether you intended it or not. As Hope's third birthday approached, Red Hollow Ranch was home to 9 residents beyond the Rourke family. 3 permanent ranch hands, 5 women in various stages of recovery, and Sarah, who'd become something like a business partner, her financial acumen proving invaluable as the operation grew more complex. They celebrated Hope's birthday with a gathering that felt more like a small-town festival than a family party. Someone had made a cake. Someone else had fashioned toys from scraps of wood and leather. There was music. One of the ranch hands played fiddle, and to everyone's surprise, Sarah had a beautiful singing voice that she'd finally become comfortable sharing. Hope was overwhelmed by the attention, hiding behind Lydia's skirts one moment and running wild the next, her laughter echoing across the ranch. Watching her, Caleb felt his throat tighten with emotion. This was what they'd fought for, what they'd nearly died for, the chance to give their daughter a childhood filled with love and safety and possibility. She's going to grow up thinking this is normal, Lydia said, appearing at his side. Having all these people around, seeing women work alongside men, understanding that families come in all shapes. Is that a bad thing? No, it's the best thing. It means we're raising her to see people instead of categories, to judge character instead of circumstances. Your mother would be proud of you. Lydia looked at him, surprised. You think so? I know so. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into something that helps others. That's not just survival, that's grace. The celebration continued into evening, and as the sun set and lanterns were lit, Caleb found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them here. It had been 4 years since Lydia stepped off that mail coach, frightened and hopeful and carrying secrets that would nearly destroy them both. 4 years of violence and healing, loss and growth, fear and triumph. They weren't the same people who'd stood awkwardly in the dust, strangers bound by letters and desperation. They'd been forged into something stronger by everything they'd endured, and they'd created something that mattered, not just a successful ranch, but a place where broken people could become whole again. Marcus arrived late to the party, still in his sheriff's uniform, his face showing the strain of long hours, but he smiled when he saw Hope being passed from person to person, each adult making her giggle with their antics. Congratulations, Marcus told Caleb, on everything. The ranch, the family, what you're building here, it's impressive. Couldn't have done it without you. Wouldn't have survived to try. You'd have found a way. You're both too stubborn to quit. Marcus accepted a glass of whiskey someone offered. Though I'll admit I didn't see this coming, you running what amounts to a sanctuary for traumatized women. Life's full of surprises. That it is. Marcus grew serious. Speaking of which, I need to tell you something. It's not urgent, but you should know. There's been talk in territorial circles about expanding what you're doing here, creating similar programs in other parts of the territory, maybe even in other territories, using Red Hollow as a model. We're not a model, we're just doing what needs doing, which is exactly what makes it worth replicating. Not everyone can do what you do, Caleb. Most people would have turned the first woman away, said it wasn't their problem. You and Lydia saw people hurting and helped them. That simple choice has rippled out in ways you can't fully see. Caleb watched Lydia across the yard, saw her laughing at something Sarah said, saw Hope toddle over and reach up to be held. His wife scooped up their daughter with practiced ease, settling her on one hip, continuing her conversation without missing a beat. She looked happy. She looked home. "I just wanted her to be safe," Caleb said quietly. "That's all I ever wanted. Everything else just kind of happened." "Maybe. But you let it happen instead of fighting it. That takes its own kind of courage." As night deepened and the party wound down, people drifted off to their bunks and cabins, calling good nights across the yard. Caleb and Lydia put Hope to bed together, singing the lullaby they'd sung every night since she was born. She fought sleep as always, her eyes drifting closed, then popping open, determined not to miss anything. "Close your eyes, little one," Lydia whispered. "Tomorrow's another day for adventures." "Venture?" Hope mumbled, the word distorted by exhaustion, but recognizable. "More venture." "Yes, more adventures. Always more adventures." Finally, Hope surrendered to sleep, her breathing evening out, her small hand curled around Caleb's finger. They stood together over her crib for a long moment, neither willing to break the spell of peace. Outside, the ranch settled into nighttime quiet, the soft sounds of horses in the stable, the distant call of a coyote, the murmur of voices from the bunkhouse where the ranch hands were still awake. It was the sound of home, of community, of lives intertwining in ways that made everyone stronger. "Do you think we'll ever have a quiet, normal life?" Lydia asked as they finally left Hope's room. "Probably not. But would you really want that?" She considered, then smiled. "No, I suppose I wouldn't. This is better than anything I could have imagined when I wrote that first letter." "Same here. I thought I was just looking for someone to talk to over dinner. Instead, I got a revolution. A small revolution. The best kind." He pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. "Thank you for answering my advertisement, for taking a chance on a lonely rancher in the middle of nowhere. Thank you for not sending me away when you learned the truth, for standing with me when running would have been easier, for building this with me." They stood together in the doorway, looking out at Red Hollow Ranch, their home, their life's work, their gift to a daughter who would grow up knowing that courage and compassion could transform the world, one small piece at a time. The letter that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday morning in early September, 5 years after Lydia had first stepped off the mail coach into Caleb's uncertain life. Hope was starting her lessons with Sarah now, learning to read and write in the converted study where books lined shelves Caleb had built from salvaged wood. The ranch was thriving. The sanctuary program was helping its 12th and 13th residents, and for the first time in years, Caleb had allowed himself to believe that peace might actually last. The envelope bore an official seal from Washington District of Columbia and was addressed to both Mr. and Mrs. Caleb Rourke. Marcus delivered it personally, which should have been Caleb's first warning that something significant was coming. "You'd better both sit down for this," Marcus said, accepting coffee, but refusing to make small talk. His face held an expression Caleb couldn't quite read, excitement mixed with concern, pride mixed with worry. Lydia opened the letter with hands that had learned not to shake at unexpected correspondence anymore. She read silently, her eyes moving faster as she progressed, and Caleb watched her face cycle through disbelief, shock, and something that might have been wonder. "They want us to come to Washington," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "The president wants to meet us. There's going to be a national conference on combating human trafficking, and they want us to speak, to share our story and the work we've done here." "The president," Caleb repeated, the words feeling surreal in his mouth. "Of the United States." "They're calling it a national model," Lydia continued reading. "The Red Hollow program. They want to study what we've done, replicate it in other territories and states. There's talk of federal funding, of making this a formal government initiative. She looked up at Marcus. Did you know about this? I had an inkling. The territorial governor's been corresponding with Washington about your program for months. I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure it would actually happen. Politicians make a lot of promises they don't keep. Marcus leaned forward. But this is real, and it's big. This could change how the entire country deals with victims of trafficking and exploitation. Caleb stood and walked to the window, processing. The idea of leaving the ranch, of traveling across the country to a city he'd never seen, of speaking in front of powerful people about things he still had nightmares about, it felt impossible. But he looked out at the ranch, at the women working alongside the men, at the life they'd built from ashes and determination, and he understood that this was bigger than his comfort. When would we need to leave? He asked. 3 weeks. They'd cover all expenses, provide security, arrange everything. You'd be gone about 2 weeks total. Marcus paused. I know it's a lot to ask, but Caleb, Lydia, what you've done here matters. It could help thousands of people if others learn from it. Lydia stood and joined Caleb at the window. Outside, Hope was chasing chickens while Sarah supervised, ready to intervene if the child's enthusiasm got the better of her judgment. It was an ordinary moment in a life that had become extraordinarily ordinary after so much chaos. We have to go, Lydia said quietly. Don't we? We have to speak for all the women who can't speak for themselves. Yeah, I think we do. The decision made, the next 3 weeks became a whirlwind of preparation. They left the ranch in Sarah's capable hands. She'd essentially been running the business side for over a year anyway. Anna Birch agreed to stay at Red Hollow while they were gone, providing an additional layer of security and experience. The ranch hands received detailed instructions about every aspect of operation, though they barely needed them. The place had become self-sustaining through the collective effort of everyone who called it home. The hardest part was explaining to Hope why they were leaving. It's just for a little while, Lydia told their daughter, who at 5 years old was old enough to understand absence but not old enough to fully grasp time. Mama and Papa have to go talk to some important people about helping others, the way we help people here. Can't I come? Hope's lower lip trembled and Caleb felt his resolve waver. Not this time, little one, but Sarah and Aunt Anna will be here and all your friends, and we'll bring you back something special from the big city. A real doll with a dress? A real doll with a dress, I promise. They left on a Monday morning, boarding a train in Socorro that would take them first to Denver, then across the plains to St. Louis, and finally to Washington. Caleb had been on trains before, but never for such a distance, never for such a purpose. He felt out of place in the pressed suit he'd bought for the occasion, his calloused hands strange against the fine fabric. Lydia wore a new dress, dark green with subtle embroidery, that Sarah had helped her choose from a catalog. She looked elegant and nervous, her hands folded in her lap, watching the landscape roll past the window with an expression Caleb couldn't quite read. What are you thinking? He asked as the train picked up speed, leaving the desert behind. That I never thought I'd go back east. After I fled, I promised myself I'd never return to that part of the country, never put myself in a position where Victor's associates might find me. She turned to look at him. Victor's dead. His organization's destroyed. The men who worked for him are in prison or scattered, but I'm still afraid. Isn't that ridiculous? It's not ridiculous, it's human. He took her hand. But you're not alone this time. I'm with you, and so is the truth. Everything you survived, everything we built, it has meaning now beyond just us. That's worth facing the fear. The journey took 4 days, each one carrying them further from the familiar landscape of desert and mesa into territories neither had seen before. They watched the plains give way to farmland, farmland to forests, forests to cities that grew progressively larger and more overwhelming. By the time they reached Washington, Caleb felt like he'd traveled not just across the country, but into an entirely different world. The nation's capital was a revelation and an assault on the senses. Buildings rose higher than Caleb had imagined possible. Streets teemed with people moving with purpose and speed. Carriages and early automobiles competed for space in a chaos that made Socorro's quiet main street feel like a distant dream. The air itself was different, humid, dense, carrying smells of industry and humanity in concentrated doses. They were met at the station by a government official named Thomas Berkeley, A precise man with spectacles in a manner that was professional but not unkind. He escorted them to a hotel that was more luxurious than any building Caleb had ever entered, with carpeted floors, electric lights, and indoor plumbing that seemed almost magical after years of ranch practicality. "You'll have 2 days to rest and prepare before the conference," Berkeley explained, showing them to a suite that was larger than their ranch house's main room. "We've arranged for you to meet with the conference organizers tomorrow, go over your remarks, discuss what questions to expect. The president will meet with you privately before the main event." After Berkeley left, Caleb and Lydia stood in the center of the ornate room, feeling displaced and strange. "I don't belong here," Caleb said, gesturing at the gilt-edged mirrors, the velvet curtains, the chandelier that probably cost more than a year of ranch profits. "Neither do I. But maybe that's the point." Lydia moved to the window, looking out at the city spreading in all directions. "Maybe they need to hear from people who don't belong in places like this. People who know what it's like to struggle and survive and build something from nothing." The next day's meetings were both easier and harder than Caleb anticipated. The conference organizers were earnest people who genuinely seemed to care about the cause, but they also had a vision for how Caleb and Lydia should present themselves, a vision that felt sanitized and simplified. "We want to focus on the triumph," one organizer explained. A woman named Helen Danvers, who'd apparently coordinated several national reform initiatives. "The public responds to stories of overcoming adversity, of resilience, of transformation. The darker details, the violence, the explicit nature of the trafficking, we need to handle those carefully." "But the darkness is what people need to understand," Lydia countered. "If we sugarcoat it, if we make it palatable, we're doing a disservice to everyone still trapped in that darkness." "I understand your perspective, Mrs. Rourke, I truly do. But we're trying to build public support for legislative change, and that requires messaging that doesn't alienate potential allies." Helen's tone was patient but firm. There's a balance between truth and effectiveness. The debate continued for hours, neither side fully yielding. Finally, a compromise was reached. Lydia would speak honestly about her experiences, but would frame them within the larger context of systemic exploitation rather than dwelling on individual acts of violence. Caleb would focus on the practical aspects of the sanctuary program, demonstrating that solutions existed and could be replicated. The day of the conference arrived with autumn rain that turned Washington streets into rivers of mud and made Caleb oddly homesick for the clean, dry dust of New Mexico. They dressed carefully, Lydia in a new suit that made her look professional and serious, Caleb in his pressed clothes that still felt like a costume. The private meeting with the president happened first, in a room lined with books and history. The president was younger than Caleb expected, with a firm handshake and eyes that suggested genuine intelligence. He listened as they briefly outlined their story, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed to grasp the complexity of what they'd lived through. "What you've built at Red Hollow represents the best of American ingenuity and compassion," the president said, "taking a problem that seems insurmountable and finding a practical solution through determination and sacrifice. That's the story this nation needs to hear right now." "With respect, sir, it's not just a story," Lydia said, and Caleb felt a flash of pride at her directness. "It's ongoing work with real women who need real support. If this conference is going to mean anything, it can't just be about inspiration. It has to be about allocation of resources, about enforcement of laws, about changing the systems that allow exploitation to flourish." The president smiled. "You're absolutely right, Mrs. Rourke. And I assure you, this administration is committed to exactly that kind of systemic change. Your program will serve as a blueprint, but it will also receive federal support to continue and expand." The main conference was held in a grand hall filled with hundreds of people, legislators, reformers, journalists, activists from across the country. Caleb had never seen so many people gathered in one place, had never felt the weight of so much attention focused on a single point. When their names were called, he and Lydia walked to the stage together, hands clasped, drawing strength from each other as they'd done through every crisis. Lydia spoke first, her voice steady despite the tremor Caleb could feel in her hand before she released it. She told their story with honesty and grace, neither exaggerating nor minimizing the horror of what she'd endured and what countless other women continued to endure. She described the trafficking ring not as an aberration, but as a symptom of larger societal failures to protect the vulnerable. She outlined the sanctuary program not as charity, but as a framework for restoration and empowerment. The audience was rapt, silent except for occasional gasps or murmurs of sympathy. Caleb watched faces in the crowd and saw tears, anger, determination. Lydia was reaching them, making them understand in a way no amount of statistics or policy papers could achieve. When she finished, the applause was thunderous and sustained. She stepped back and Caleb moved forward to speak about the practical realities of running the program, the costs, the challenges, the successes, the replicable elements. His remarks were less eloquent than Lydia's, but grounded in the kind of concrete detail that policymakers needed. He presented Red Hollow not as a miracle, but as a methodology, something that could be studied, adapted, and implemented elsewhere. During the question period that followed, one journalist asked the question Caleb had been dreading. "Mr. Rourke, you killed men defending your wife and your property. Some people would say you took the law into your own hands, that vigilante justice is dangerous regardless of motivation. How do you respond to that criticism?" Caleb took a moment before answering, aware that his words would be quoted, analyzed, potentially used against everything they were trying to accomplish. "I'd say that when the law fails to protect people, when corrupt officials are complicit in exploitation, people have to protect themselves. I didn't seek violence. I sought help from legitimate authorities and got it from Ranger Marcus Hale, who's as good a lawman as exists in this country. But yes, when armed men attacked my home with intent to kidnap and likely kill my wife, I defended her. I'd do it again." He paused. "The real question isn't whether I had the right to defend my family. It's why women like my wife are put in positions where such defense is necessary. Fix that system, and you won't need to worry about whether men like me will take extreme measures to protect the people they love." The response was mixed, some applause, some uncomfortable shifting, some furious note-taking by journalists. But Caleb had spoken his truth, and he wouldn't take it back. The conference lasted 3 days, filled with panels, discussions, working groups focused on legislative proposals and program design. Caleb and Lydia attended what they could, but often they found themselves in smaller meetings with activists and former victims who wanted to share their stories privately, seeking advice or simply connection with people who'd walked a similar path. One evening, a woman approached them in the hotel lobby. She was well-dressed, middle-aged, with a bearing that suggested education and means, but her eyes held the familiar shadow of trauma. "Mrs. Rourke, Mr. Rourke, I'm Elizabeth Harrison. I was married through Victor Grange's agency 8 years ago. I never came forward during the trials because my husband was one of the men in the ledger, one of the ones who paid the blackmail. He died 3 years ago, and I've been trying to figure out how to live with what happened." Lydia took the woman's hands. "You're living now. That's what matters. You survived." "Did I? Sometimes I'm not sure. I have money now, from my husband's estate. I have freedom, but I don't have purpose. I don't know how to turn what I endured into something meaningful." Elizabeth's voice cracked. "How did you do it? How did you transform your pain into something that helps others?" "One day at a time. One person at a time. One choice at a time to reach back and pull someone else forward." Lydia glanced at Caleb, "And having someone who believes in you even when you don't believe in yourself. That helps too." They talked with Elizabeth for over an hour, and by the end she was considering traveling to New Mexico to volunteer at Red Hollow to learn the model so she might establish something similar in her home state of Virginia. It was one conversation among dozens like it, each one reinforcing the ripples spreading out from their story. On their final evening in Washington, Caleb and Lydia took a walk through the city despite the late hour. The streets were quieter now, gas lamps and early electric lights creating pools of illumination in the darkness. They found themselves near the Capitol building, its dome silhouetted against the night sky. "Do you think we actually accomplished anything?" Caleb asked. "Or was this all just theater, people feeling good about caring without actually changing anything?" "I think we planted seeds. Some will grow, some won't. But we told the truth, and truth has a way of working on people even when they resist it." Lydia leaned against him. "And we met women like Elizabeth, women who needed to know they weren't alone. That's not nothing." "No, it's not." He kissed the top of her head. "I'm proud of you, of us, of everything we've survived to get here. Are you ready to go home?" "More than ready. I miss hope, I miss the ranch. I miss knowing what I'm supposed to be doing with my day. Me too, though I won't miss indoor plumbing. That's something we should seriously consider adding. Caleb laughed, and they stood together looking at the seat of national power. Two people from the frontier who'd somehow found themselves at the center of a movement larger than they'd ever imagined. The journey home felt longer than the journey east, perhaps because they were traveling towards something now rather than away from it. They arrived in Socorro on a Tuesday afternoon, dusty and travel-worn, and found Marcus waiting at the station with horses and news. "Everything's fine at the ranch," Marcus assured them before they could ask. "Sarah sent word yesterday that all's well, Hope's thriving, and they're eager to have you back. Thank you for watching over things while we were gone." "Wasn't just me. Whole community stepped up. Dutch's boys rode over from California to help with a fence repair. Anna's still there playing grandmother to Hope and drill sergeant to everyone else." Marcus grinned. "You've built something that matters, Caleb. People want to protect it." They rode toward Red Hollow as the sun began its descent, painting the desert in shades of amber and rose that no eastern city could match. The land welcomed them back with familiar scents, sage and dust, and the clean smell of space. Caleb felt tension he hadn't realized he was carrying drain away with each mile. The ranch came into view, and Caleb saw Hope before she saw them. She was sitting on the porch with Sarah, working on something with intense concentration. Then Sarah pointed, and Hope's head snapped up. The child launched herself off the porch with a scream of joy that carried across the yard. "Mama, Papa, you came back!" Caleb dismounted in time to catch her as she ran full speed into his arms, nearly knocking him over with the force of her enthusiasm. Lydia was right behind him, wrapping her arms around them both, and for a moment they were a tangle of reunion and relief and love. "Did you bring my doll?" Hope asked, pulling back to look at them with serious eyes. "We brought your doll," Lydia confirmed. "And stories, so many stories. Tell me now." "Later. First we need to see everyone, make sure everything's all right." Sarah emerged from the house looking capable and slightly amused. "Everything ran smoothly. We had one issue with a coyote getting into the chicken coop, but Anna dealt with it. And the women, your residents, they've been amazing. 2 of them are ready to move on, actually. Found employment in Socorro and want to try standing on their own." "That's good. That's what we want." Lydia set Hope down but kept hold of her hand. "Are they nervous?" "Terrified, but ready. That's growth." Over the next few days, Caleb and Lydia reintegrated into ranch life, with the ease of people returning to their true selves. They met with the 2 women preparing to leave, Emily and Ruth, who'd arrived within weeks of each other a year ago, both fleeing similar situations. The women were anxious but determined, and watching them prepare to step into independent lives felt like witnessing graduation from a school that taught survival. "Thank you for giving me a place to heal," Emily told Lydia on the day she left. "I came here broken, and I'm leaving whole. Not perfect, not undamaged, but whole. That's a gift I can never repay." "You don't need to repay it. Just live well. That's payment enough." News from Washington arrived in waves over the following weeks. The conference had resulted in bipartisan legislative proposals for federal anti-trafficking initiatives. Multiple states were establishing programs modeled on Red Hollow's sanctuary approach. Funding had been allocated for both prevention and victim services. And buried in the formal announcements was a personal letter from the president thanking them for their service to the nation. "We're famous," Caleb said, reading the newspaper coverage that portrayed them as folk heroes. "We're convenient symbols," Lydia corrected. "There's a difference, but if being symbols helps get resources to people who need them, I can live with it." The ranch continued to evolve. With federal funding now available, they were able to expand the program, hire a part-time counselor who visited weekly, improve the living facilities. But they were careful not to let growth change the essential nature of what they'd built. It remained a working ranch where healing happened through labor, community, and time. Hope started formal school that fall, riding into Socorro twice a week with Sarah for lessons, returning full of information and questions that exhausted Caleb and delighted Lydia. She was growing fast, her baby softness giving way to the lean strength of a child who spent her days outdoors. She could ride a horse, mend a fence, cook a simple meal, and read at a level beyond her years. "She's going to be formidable," Anna observed one afternoon, watching Hope organize the younger children of ranch hands into some elaborate game of her own invention. She's got your stubbornness, Caleb, and Lydia's steel. That's a dangerous combination in the best possible way. I just want her to be happy, Caleb said. She will be, because she'll know how to fight for her happiness. You're teaching her that every day. Winter came again, but it felt different this year, less like survival and more like a season to endure before spring returned. The ranch had weathered enough winters now to have systems in place, stores laid up, rhythms established. They gathered in the main house on cold evenings, family and ranch hands and residents, a community that transcended traditional definitions. One night, with snow falling outside and a fire crackling in the hearth, Hope asked the question Caleb had been expecting but dreading. Mama, why do sad ladies come to live with us? The room went quiet. Lydia glanced at Caleb, and he nodded slightly, deferring to her judgment on how much truth to share. Because sometimes people get hurt, Lydia said carefully, pulling Hope onto her lap. And when they're hurt, they need a safe place to heal. Our ranch is that safe place. Who hurt them? Bad people who didn't understand that you can't own someone else, can't control them or hurt them for your own benefit. People who forgot that everyone deserves kindness and respect. Hope was quiet, processing. Then she asked, Did bad people hurt you too? Yes, sweetheart. They did. A long time ago. And Papa made them stop? Papa helped me stop them. We did it together. Good. Hope's expression was fierce. I'm glad Papa protected you. When I grow up, I'm going to protect people too, just like you do. Caleb felt his throat tighten. This was the legacy they were building, not just a ranch or a program, but a child who understood that strength meant protecting others, that surviving meant reaching back to help those still in danger. Spring arrived with its usual pageantry of renewal. The desert bloomed with wildflowers that only appeared after winter rains. New calves wobbled on uncertain legs. Seeds planted months ago broke through soil toward sunlight, and Lydia announced she was pregnant again. Are you happy? She asked Caleb when she told him, uncertainty creeping into her voice. I know we didn't plan this, and things are busy with the ranch and the program. I'm thrilled, he said honestly. Hope needs a sibling to keep her humble, and I like being a father. It's the one thing I'm actually good at. You're good at more than that. She touched his face tenderly. You're good at building things that last, at standing firm when others would run, at loving fiercely and completely. Those are rare gifts, Caleb Rourke. The second pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because they knew what to expect, perhaps because Lydia was stronger now, more settled in her body and her life. She worked alongside everyone through her 6th month, refusing to be treated as fragile. Only in the final weeks did she slow down, and even then, reluctantly. The baby, a boy they named Samuel after Caleb's father, arrived in early December as the first snows dusted the desert. He was smaller than Hope had been, but just as fierce, announcing his arrival with lusty cries that suggested he'd have no trouble making his presence known in a household that already felt full. Hope was entranced by her baby brother, insisting on helping with everything, singing to him in a surprisingly tuneful voice she must have inherited from Lydia. Watching his daughter, gentle and protective with her sibling, Caleb saw the future taking shape. Not just his own family's future, but the future of everything they'd built. Sarah had married one of the ranch hands that summer, a quiet man named Thomas, who'd worked Red Hollow for 3 years. They were building a small house on the property, planning to stay and help run the expanding operation. 2 of the women who'd come through the program had chosen to stay permanently as well, having found in the ranch not just refuge but home. We're becoming a village, Lydia observed one evening, nursing Samuel while watching Hope play outside with the other children who now called Red Hollow home. Not just a ranch or a program, but an actual community of people who chose each other. Is that a problem? No, it's beautiful. It's more than I ever dreamed we could build. She looked at him with eyes that held no more fear, only contentment and purpose. We made something good, Caleb. Despite everything, the violence, the trauma, all the darkness, we made something genuinely good. The 5th anniversary of their marriage arrived in the spring, and they celebrated quietly, just the 2 of them, leaving the children with Sarah for an evening. They rode out to a mesa overlooking the ranch, spreading a blanket and watching the sunset over their domain. 5 years, Caleb said. Feels like a lifetime and a moment all at once. It's been both. We've lived several lifetimes in 5 years. Lydia leaned against him, comfortable and content. If you could go back and tell the man you were, then what was coming, all of it, the good and the terrible, would you still answer my letter? Caleb didn't need to think about his answer. Without hesitation, every moment of fear, every drop of blood, every nightmare, it was the price of admission to this life. To you, to our children, to the home we built. I'd pay it 1,000 times over. Even knowing it almost destroyed us? It didn't destroy us. It forged us. There's a difference. They sat in silence as the stars emerged, the same stars that had witnessed their first awkward conversation, their desperate battles, their slow transformation from strangers into partners into family. The ranch spread below them, lights beginning to glow in windows, smoke rising from chimneys, the sounds of evening routines carrying on the clear air. What do you think happens next? Lydia asked. We've survived so much, overcome so much. What's the next chapter? More of this, raising our children, helping others, working the land, growing old together. Caleb smiled. Nothing dramatic, just life. The ordinary kind that used to bore me and now feels like the greatest gift imaginable. I can live with ordinary. I think I've earned it. We both have. The years that followed proved Caleb right. There were no more dramatic crises, no more life-threatening confrontations, no more battles to fight beyond the ordinary struggles of making a living from difficult land and raising children in an unforgiving climate. But those ordinary years were rich in ways the dramatic ones could never be. Hope grew into a teenager with her mother's intelligence and her father's determination, declaring her intention to become a lawyer so she could fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Samuel was gentler, drawn to animals and books, content to spend hours reading or training horses with a patience that amazed everyone. The sanctuary program expanded to serve dozens of women annually, with former residents returning to work as counselors and advocates, creating a cycle of healing that perpetuated itself. Other ranches and communities across the territory and beyond established similar programs, each adapting the Red Hollow model to their circumstances. The network that formed created a safety web spanning thousands of miles. Caleb and Lydia were invited to speak at conferences and events regularly, but they accepted fewer invitations as the years passed, preferring to stay home and tend to the daily work that mattered more than any spotlight. They told their story, planted their seeds. Now it was time to let others carry the message forward. Marcus served as sheriff for 15 years before retiring, moving to a small house on Red Hollow land where he became a beloved presence, teaching the children to track and shoot and understand the land. Anna Birch remained a fixture until her death at 80, sitting on the porch, directing operations with the authority of a general and the affection of a grandmother. Sarah and Thomas had 3 children of their own, and their family became integral to the ranch's operation, ensuring continuity and stability. Other families joined over time, drawn by the reputation of a place where people were valued over profit, where community meant something real. On their 20th anniversary, Caleb and Lydia stood on the same mesa where they'd watched the sunset after 5 years of marriage. But now they weren't alone. Their children were with them, Hope nearly 17 and Samuel 12, both tall and strong and full of the confidence that came from being raised with love and purpose. Tell us the story again, Samuel asked, settling on the blanket between his parents. About how you met. It was a request they heard often, and one they never tired of fulfilling. Together, taking turns, they told the tale. Caleb's loneliness and desperate advertisement, Lydia's fear and false identity, the violence that nearly destroyed them, the love that ultimately saved them. That's so romantic, Hope said, with the slightly mocking tone teenagers use to hide genuine emotion. And also terrifying. You two are basically legends. We're not legends, Lydia corrected gently. We're just people who refuse to give up. On ourselves, on each other, on the possibility that something good could come from something terrible. That's what makes it legendary, Hope insisted. Most people give up. You didn't. As the sun set, painting the sky in impossible colors, Caleb looked at his wife and saw not the frightened woman who'd stepped off the mail coach 20 years ago, but the sum of everything they'd become together. The lines on her face told stories of laughter and worry, triumph and loss. The strength in her bearing spoke of battles fought and won. The peace in her eyes reflected a life well lived despite its rocky beginning. "I love you," he said simply, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "I love you too. Always have, even when I was too scared to admit it. Always will, for whatever years we have left." They rode back to the ranch as darkness fell, the house lights welcoming them home. Inside, the community they'd built was gathering for dinner, families and individuals, old friends and new arrivals, a tapestry of lives intertwined by choice and circumstance. The table Sarah had set could barely accommodate everyone, but they made it work through creative seating and shared benches. The meal was simple but abundant: beef from their own herd, vegetables from the expanded garden, bread baked fresh that morning. The conversation was louder than any one person's voice, filled with laughter and gentle teasing and the comfortable chaos of people who knew each other well. Hope helped serve, moving with the grace of young adulthood, already showing signs of the formidable woman she'd become. Samuel entertained the younger children with a story he'd written about a brave horse who saved his family from danger. And Caleb and Lydia presided over it all with the quiet satisfaction of people who'd built exactly what they'd set out to build, even if they hadn't known that's what they were doing at the time. Later, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Caleb and Lydia sat on the porch one last time, wrapped in a shared blanket against the evening chill. The stars overhead were the same stars that had witnessed their beginning, eternal and unchanging, while everything beneath them transformed. "No regrets?" Caleb asked, the question ritual by now but still meaningful. "Not a single one. Every choice led here, and here is exactly where I want to be." "Even the hard choices? The painful ones?" "Especially those. Easy choices don't build anything that lasts. Hard choices, the ones that cost us something precious, those are the foundation of everything meaningful." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd learned that love wasn't just a feeling, but a choice made daily, sometimes moment by moment, to stand together against whatever came. They'd chosen each other in letters and in fear, in violence and in peace, in struggle and in triumph. And through all of it, they'd built something that would outlast them both. Red Hollow Ranch would continue long after they were gone, Caleb knew. Their children would carry it forward, and after them their grandchildren, each generation adding their own chapters to a story that had started with a lonely man's advertisement and a desperate woman's reply. The sanctuary program would evolve and expand, touching lives they'd never meet, creating ripples in waters they'd never see. But tonight, in this moment, it was enough to sit together under familiar stars, feeling the solid earth beneath them, and knowing they'd kept every promise that mattered. They'd built a home. They'd created a family. They'd offered refuge to those who needed it. They'd loved fiercely and completely, despite every reason to close their hearts. "Ready for bed?" Lydia asked finally, the chill deepening as midnight approached. "In a minute. I want to remember this. Exactly this. The sound of the wind, the smell of sage, the weight of you against me. The feeling of being home. We have tomorrow to remember too, and all the days after that." "I know. But this moment, this specific, perfect moment, I want to hold on to it." So they sat a while longer, holding on to the present while honoring the past and trusting the future. And when they finally went inside, closing the door against the night, Red Hollow Ranch settled into sleep around them. A place of healing and hope, built from courage and sustained by love. Proof that even in the harsh frontier, even after darkness and violence, beauty could flourish and good could triumph. The story that began with a mail-order bride and a lonely rancher had become something far greater, a testament to the power of standing firm, reaching back, and building something that mattered. Not just for themselves, but for everyone who came after, searching for the same things Caleb and Lydia had found in each other. Hope, home, love fierce enough to face any darkness. And in the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.